Chapter 393. The Crown Prince had been scolded, the scope of the investigation had shrunk, and the Ministry of Revenue was temporarily safe. The Overwatch Council could straighten its back again. This matter was very interesting. Whether or not the First Bureau of the Overwatch Council could straighten their backs depended on the angle of the Minister of Revenue's body and the ground. Who the scholar slammed the table in the Hall of Governmental Affairs and pointed at the faces of the elders of the 6 departments, cursing these officials for their uncleanliness. In any case, he was still young and hot-tempered. He did not need to be like Shu Wu and always put on the bearing and demeanor of a senior official. What the emperor needed was Who the scholar's reputation and drive. However, in the matter of investigating the Ministry of Revenue, Who the scholar had not completely satisfied the emperor's requirements. In his opinion, at least from the situation of the investigation, the Ministry of Revenue was truly not easy. What made Who the scholar most angry was that, even now, some officials in court still could not forget and wanted to find evidence of crimes related to Jiangnan in the Ministry of Revenue's accounts. The sound of slamming the table rang out again. Who the scholar furrowed his brows deeply and stared coldly at the official beside him. In a low voice, he said, "Moving silver to Jiangnan? Where is the silver? Isn't it still in the Ministry of Revenue's treasury? In the future, if you don't have evidence, don't talk about these groundless things to avoid chilling the officials' hearts." He looked at the ashen-faced officials and snorted coldly, "Sirs, take care of yourselves." After saying this, Who the scholar shook out his sleeves and walked out of the little room beside the royal palace, leaving behind many officials in the room looking at each other. Everyone felt deep regret and embarrassment. When investigating the Ministry of Revenue, the Ministry of Revenue was clean. On the contrary, it was their faction that had countless problems found. The backers behind these officials were all inextricably linked to Jiangnan. From the situation in Jiangnan, these major figures determined that the silver Fan Xian used to clash with the Ming family had certainly been moved out of the national treasury. It was because of this judgment that these people dared to attack the Ministry of Revenue so confidently. Since so much silver was still stored in the Palace Treasury Transport Company, then the national treasury would certainly not be able to erase it. Yet there was not a trace of it. These officials gnashed their teeth in hatred. Even after being reprimanded by Who the scholar, they did not dare to talk back. Who told them to shout so loudly and yet not be able to find any problems? The father and son of the Fan family were too treacherous. It was early in the morning, and the sun in the east had not yet risen. The Hall of Governmental Affairs was only drafting the memorials for the court conference. The expressions of the officials were all a bit tired. Most of them had not slept all night. However, thinking of the fight in the court conference, everyone had to raise their spirits. The first stage of the Ministry of Revenue's investigation had clearly ended with the complete defeat of the eldest princess and the Eastern Palace. But how could they salvage the situation? Intentionally or unintentionally, these officials cast their gazes towards a young official who had been sitting in a dark corner. This young official's name was He Zhongwei. He was one of the most popular people in the court. He had some previous connections with the eldest princess's Eastern Palace and was now deeply appreciated by the emperor. It was precisely because Who the scholar did not want to make a big fuss about the Ministry of Revenue that the emperor had many intentions that could not be expressed verbally and could not be smoothly handled through the officials. This was why the Imperial Censorate's new Imperial Censor of the Left, He Zhongwei, was transferred to the team investigating the Ministry of Revenue. The officials looked at He Zhongwei. Naturally, they wanted to know from this young official's mouth exactly how the palace was going to handle this matter. He had been specially ordered to listen in on matters in the Hall of Governmental Affairs for 3 days. He had been steady and proper. He was respectful and strict toward Who the scholar and the other officials. He did not say much and did not act rashly. He was deeply steady. However, being stared at by these officials, He Zhongwei knew that he had to show some ability. This was not only for himself but also for the emperor. "What a mess," he sighed and warmly said to the officials. "It looks like this matter will have to be slowly tormented." Who the scholar was a bit anxious earlier. "Please do not worry too much." Slowly dealing with it showed the palace's attitude. The fan manor's response was clever and unyielding. It made it so that the palace could not find a good way to replace the Minister of Revenue in a short time. They could only wait for another opportunity. The officials fell silent. They were dissatisfied and also faintly worried. Since Fan Jian's position did not change, the officials who had led the attack would have to pay a corresponding price. In the court conference after the matter, the officials belonging to the eldest princess and the Eastern Palace launched a final attack. It was not to kill the enemy, but to protect themselves. Even though the Ministry of Revenue was clean, the investigation team still found some problems. Under the guidance of He Zhongwei, who had joined after the matter, the officials gave up on the shocking crimes and only focused on the small problems in the Ministry of Revenue. For example, some accounts were unclear, or a small sum of silver had disappeared. Although they were all small problems, they at least showed that they were investigating the Ministry of Revenue not to hold a grudge or take revenge. They truly wanted to find the problems in the Ministry of Revenue. In the court conference, listening to the impassioned accusations of the officials, who the scholars smiled coldly in the first position on the left, Shu Wu stood beside him with a face full of worry. The Minister of Appointments, Yan Hangshu, did not say a word. The emperor sat upright on the dragon chair and looked at a person among the civil officials with a complicated gaze. The Minister of Revenue, Fan Jian, had also come to the court conference. The emperor looked at Fan Jian's slightly grizzled hair and sighed in his heart. He opened his mouth and asked, "Where did that 180,000 liang of silver go?" Fan Jian stepped out of the ranks. He did not defend himself or explain. Showing his old age, he bowed and directly asked for forgiveness. The 180,000 liang of silver had long been sent to the river transport governor's yamen. The court immediately burst into an uproar. The Ministry of Appointments and related officials who had strongly advocated investigating the Ministry of Revenue had a flash of joy on their faces. They had no idea why the experienced and ruthless Minister of Revenue would admit in court, in front of the emperor, that he had secretly moved silver from the national treasury to the river transport governor's yamen. They knew this was an opportunity that could not be missed. In an instant, the officials all stepped out and righteously criticized the Ministry of Revenue. They aimed the spearhead at Fan Jian. In this world, only the emperor's edict had the power to move silver from the national treasury. No one else could do so. Fan Jian had the Ministry of Revenue move silver into the river transport governor's yamen without the royal approval. No matter how one looked at it, it was a crime of deceiving the emperor. The emperor stared at Fan Jian's tired face. A faint light flashed through his eyes. It seemed that he did not hear the voices of the officials in court asking for the Ministry of Revenue to be punished. The emperor did not hear it, but some officials heard it clearly. Hearing it, anger filled the depths of their hearts. The deficit in the Ministry of Revenue was closely connected to the officials who attacked the Ministry of Revenue. Even if Minister Fan's move of silver from the national treasury to the river works was not appropriate, his intentions were understandable. This was for the court and the people, yet it became a sore spot for those shameless people to attack. Shu Wu's brows trembled anxiously. The anger in his eyes flared. He turned his head and glared at the civil officials who had stepped out. In reality, these elders of the Hall of Governmental Affairs all knew that if the court wanted to move silver, the procedures were very complicated. If they really had to slowly ask for an edict to move silver into the river works, the river would probably have long been short of banks. In the depths of winter, Shu Wu had once complained to the emperor about this matter. Although he did not know the details of Fan Jian moving silver from the Ministry of Revenue into the river transport governor's yamen, he dared to conclude that this had nothing to do with personal gain. Bullshit. Moving silver to repair the river? The Fan family had no land on either side of the river. What benefit could they possibly get? Shu Wu forcefully suppressed the anger in his chest and stood out. He bowed to the emperor on the dragon chair. Seeing this virtuous and respected scholar step out of the ranks, the officials attacking the Ministry of Revenue all stopped speaking and returned to their ranks. The emperor glanced at him and said, "What is the crime of secretly moving silver from the national treasury?" Old Shu the scholar raised his head and straightforwardly said, "Your Majesty, if you want to ask about the Qing law, You should ask the Ministry of Justice and Supreme Court. I work in the Hall of Governmental Affairs, but I am not very familiar with the Qing law. The emperor gave a not quite there smile and said, "What does the scholar want to say?" Shu Wu bowed again and turned around to glance disdainfully at the petty officials in the court. Only then did he slowly say, "I think that Minister Fan is not at fault in this matter. Pausa. The matter of the river works has always been tight. This year, fortunately, the spring floods are not as strong as in previous years, but the summer floods are about to arrive. As for the matter of the Ministry of Revenue moving silver into the river works Yamen." Shu Wu took a deep breath and respectfully said, "It was I who wrote the memorial in the Hall of Governmental Affairs and directly sent it to the Ministry of Revenue. Thus, I actually know about the matter of the Ministry of Revenue moving silver." After these words were said, the court burst into another uproar. Shu the scholar was willing to take a great risk and tie himself to the Fan family? Why was he doing this? Minister Fan also seemed to be surprised as he looked at the old scholar in front of him. The emperor furrowed his brows slightly. A moment later, he suddenly smiled and said, "Oh? Why didn't I know about this matter? I am muddle-headed. Please forgive me, Your Majesty." Shu the scholar was not muddle-headed. Earlier, the discussion in the court was ferocious and he could not stand it. The sliver of old but firm conscience at the bottom of his heart surged. His blood rushed and made him stand out to be a guarantor for the Ministry of Revenue. Now that he had come to his senses, he knew the emperor would certainly not like someone in his Hall of Governmental Affairs to be a guarantor for the 6 ministries. He forced a smile and lowered his voice. "Your Majesty, take pity on my old age. Yesterday, I drank a few cups too much and spoke with youthful frivolity. At this time, even if I wanted to shut my mouth, I can't." The emperor saw a dignified scholar playing the role of a clown and couldn't resist laughing. The sliver of unhappiness from being contradicted gradually dissipated. He couldn't strip the Minister of Revenue and a scholar of their positions for a mere 180,000 liang of silver. "Hu Shuji?" the emperor asked with a slight smile. "In your opinion, what crime should the Ministry of Revenue be charged with?" Scholar Hu stepped out. After a moment of consideration, he quietly said, "The crime of deceiving the emperor." There was a buzz in the court. The emperor raised his brows and asked with interest, "Then, how should they be punished?" Hu the scholar lowered his body very low. "The Ministry of Revenue moving silver into the river works is out of the public good and out of loyalty to serve your Majesty. Although it is deceiving the emperor, it is a deceiving of love for the emperor," Hu the scholar said lightly. Hu the scholar faintly said, "When the Qing law convicts people, they care about understanding reason and setting the situation. A clear heart knows the reason and understands the situation. The officials of the Ministry of Revenue and the minister are magnanimous and sincere. Your Majesty, please investigate." The emperor seemed to be very interested in this saying. He smiled slightly and said, "But the law is here. If we don't act according to the law, how can we pacify the mouths of the people under heaven? How can we pacify the desire of the officials to abide by the law?" "There is no need to block the mouths of the people under heaven," Hu the scholar replied in an even voice. "As long as the breach in the dikes of the great rivers can be blocked, the people can see with their eyes, hear with their ears, have food to eat, and have a place to live, they will know of your Majesty's painstaking efforts." The emperor was moved and nodded his head. Hu the scholar continued, "As for the officials..." A faint, bitter smile suddenly rose to the corners of his lips. "If the officials truly abide by the law, then so be it. In my opinion, although the Qing law is important, it is not as important as a word from the emperor. If your Majesty sympathizes with the hard work of the Ministry of Revenue and deals with them leniently, the officials in court will be grateful." In the end, he quietly said, "Your Majesty, it has been raining continuously recently." This last sentence was said very quietly. Other than a few officials near the throne, no one else could hear it. The emperor sank into deep thought. He knew that the scholars of the Hall of Governmental Affairs closest to him were standing on the side of the Fan family for the sake of the court and the wealth of the Qing kingdom. He furrowed his brows and thought that Hu and Shu did not know his true intentions. They had also been provoked by the matter of Xiohe, which was why they had come out to protect the Fan family. But was his method this time truly inappropriate? Did all the officials in court with some conscience think Fan Jian should stay? His furrowed brows gradually relaxed. Gazing at Fan Jian below, he quietly asked, "I don't want to hear what other people say. Tell me, why did you move the silver to the river transport governor's yamen without my permission?" Fan Jian sighed and took a few steps forward. Bowing to the ground, he replied simply, "Your Majesty, I'm afraid I won't make it in time." This amount of silver was actually a portion of the silver the Ministry of Revenue had sent to Jiangnan. The emperor knew this, and so did Fan Jian. The emperor knew this. In court, he had been attacked by the officials using this as an opportunity, yet Fan Jian insisted on not defending himself. He did not try to have the emperor share the burden for him. For the benefit of the people, he dared to move the silver from the treasury to Xiohe River. He was truly a rare righteous official in the Qin kingdom. No wonder he had moved the scholars Hu and Shu. For the emperor's face, he dared to not defend himself in the face of a serious crime. He was truly a rare loyal servant in the Qin kingdom. No wonder the emperor was moved. The emperor thought deeply and then slowly nodded his head. After the court meeting, a clear edict came down. The Ministry of Revenue was in a serious deficit. The emperor was furious and ordered the investigation to continue. The problems that had already been found were handed over to the Overwatch Council and Supreme Court to be responsible for investigating. The Minister of Revenue, Fan Jian, was stripped of his second-rank title, fined his salary, and kept in office. Speaking of which, it was funny. This second-rank title had been added by the palace after Fan Xian had saved the emperor in the Hanging Temple. As for the salary forfeiture, adding on to the salary forfeiture last time, Fan Jian would not receive a salary for a full 2 years. However, he still sat firmly in the position of Minister of Revenue. Correspondingly, the deficit that the Ministry of Revenue had found implicated many officials. A vigorous investigation began. The various powers were forced to cut off their own hands and feet to prevent the deficit the Ministry of Revenue had suppressed for so many years from cutting off their own heads. The Crown Prince's 400,000 liang of silver had been filled by the Empress Dowager's private savings. However, the officials of the other factions did not have such a good grandmother. Regardless of whether it was the Eastern Palace faction or the eldest princess faction, large numbers of officials fell one by one. Some new blood, such as He Zhongwei, began to gradually enter the court. Last autumn, because of Fan Xian's battle with the second prince, a group of officials had already been purged. This late spring, because of the battle between the Ministry of Revenue and the eldest princess, another group of officials had been purged. Abandonment became the main style in the court for a time. The origin of this story was in Jiangnan. It was because Fan Xian had created this fake situation that the people on the eldest princess's side thought they had caught the Fan family's greatest crime. That was why they dared to throw out so many pawns into this muddy water with the intention of pulling the Jingdo Fan family off their horse. However, no one had thought that the silver had come from northern Qi. The Fan family did not touch the silver in the national treasury. Of course, the emperor thought he knew that the Fan family had moved with his permission. The emperor thought he knew everything under heaven, but he was wrong. In any case, the Fan family had found a foothold with unusual difficulty, and the emperor's control over the officials increased a bit, making the palace a bit more stable. Everyone was happy. Looking at the present situation, at least on the surface, there was no longer any power in Jingdo that could threaten that chair. For a moment, spring was bright and peaceful. Secretly, the Crown Prince and the Second Prince were forced to form a temporary alliance. Although the Fan family had suffered some damage because of this matter, everyone knew that if Fan Xian, who was far away in Jiangnan, came back, something big was sure to happen. To be able to force two irreconcilable dragons to unite together, this kind of might and power was enough to make everyone feel proud and elated. However, Fan Xian, who had caused all of this to happen, did not feel the slightest bit proud. For one, it was because news from Jingdo had no way to travel so quickly to the distant Jiangnan. For another, It was because he could beat the princes until they didn't dare to make a sound in Jingdo. However, in Jiangnan, far away from Jingdo, faced with the Ming family that kept retreating, he suddenly found that it was strangely difficult to defeat the Ming family. It was even more difficult than defeating his royal brothers. Happy weekend! Those who have a monthly ticket, vote for one. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 394. The battles in politics and business often had a common point. Every time it looked like they were at the end of the line, it was as if there was a glimmer of hope at the end of the tunnel. Just as the oil was cooking the fire, who knew that it would instantly turn into a cold autumn? Xinyang and the Eastern Palace thought they had a clear grasp of the Ministry of Revenue's battle in Jingdo and had grasped the Fan family's biggest weakness. They arrogantly and eerily took action, wanting to have the Fan family's circumference insignia change owners. Who would have thought that in the end, it would be the complete opposite and they would lose a large amount of power for no reason? Going back to Jiangnan, Fan Xian held the imperial envoy Ming Jian in his hand, cleared out the palace treasury, took control of the transport company, and, through Xia Qifei, forced the Ming family's money to tighten. Then, through that lawsuit, he successfully plunged the Ming family into chaos. Then, through the enormous Overwatch Council's help, he made things difficult for the Ming family everywhere under heaven. His manner was overbearing, as if he could crush the Ming family into a pile of powder at any moment. At such a moment, who would have thought that so many shocking things would happen? My people want to enter the garden. Fan Xian slapped the table. His eyes were like hooks as he looked coldly at the person in front of him. Enunciating each word, he said, "Sir Shui, I have already waited 10 days. I will not wait any longer today." The person sitting beside him was the most powerful person in Jiangnan, Governor Shui Qing of Jiangnan Road. The place the two of them were having their secret discussion was in the study of the governor's manor. The accounts master of the Juanshang conference, who was also the Ming family's housekeeper, Zhou, had already been discovered by the Overwatch Council and was currently hiding in the Ming garden. Regardless of whether it was for the assassination attempt at Jiangnan restaurant or Fan Xian's strong interest in the Juanshang conference, the Overwatch Council had enough reason to kill their way into the Ming garden and drag out that person. However, it was, after all, the Ming garden, one of the 3 great gardens in the world. It represented the interests of countless people in Jiangnan, countless people's lives, and countless people's hopes. Even if Fan Xian wanted to send people into the Ming garden to search, he had no choice. He had to first go to the Jiangnan governor's manor to communicate with Shui Qing. As long as Shui Qing was willing to nod, Fan Xian did not care much about the Ming family or the Jiangnan aristocracy. It was a pity that time was pressing, so he could not send about to Wuzhou first. Naturally, he would not be able to clearly find out what Shui Qing's bottom line was from his father-in-law's mouth. Fan Xian could only go straight to the governor's manor and make this seemingly shocking suggestion. Shui Qing's attitude was clear. Shui Qing's attitude wanted the governor's manor to send people to the investigation? No way. The Jiangnan governor was not afraid of offending the Ming family, but he knew how ruthless it was. The Ming garden was like a door. In the first few months, he and Fan Xian had been tidying up the Ming family's property outside the door and tormenting the Ming family's spirit. They had not touched the Ming family's foundation. Thus, the other party had blindly retreated, endured, and appeared weak. Once the people of the government stepped into the Ming family's high threshold, the proper court of the Qing kingdom did not care about overthrowing a wealthy merchant family, even if this family was the wealthiest in the Qing kingdom. The problem was, the Ming family directly and indirectly supported hundreds of thousands of people and affected the lives of most of the common people in Jiangnan. The Ming family did not even need to fight back. As long as this situation came out, the stability of all of Jiangnan would become a major problem. Governor Shui Qing looked coldly at the young man beside him. He thought to himself, "You are the imperial envoy. When the time comes and Jiangnan becomes a mess, you can just pat your butt and leave. After you return to the capital, there is still the emperor, Director Qin, and Minister Fan to support you. But what about me? Will I have to throw all the mess after this onto myself? If Jiangnan is not stable, how can I continue as governor? Thus, after Fan Xian politely came to the governor's manor to discuss matters, Xue Qing firmly refused the request of both sides to cooperate in investigating the case. His words were very clear. Since it was that mysterious Juanshang conference, since it was a problem the Overwatch Council had found from the beginning, and since it did not involve local government, it was fine for his people to help the Overwatch Council clean up on the outside. However, he was not willing to directly enter Ming Garden and cause trouble. This was the way of being an official. Xue Qing knew that Fan Xian was not certain of the trouble that could arise from searching Ming Garden, which was why he was dragging him down with him. How could he just obediently go down? It had already been delayed for 10 days, and Xue Qing was still not willing to relent. Fan Xian's heart began to gradually become angry. After leaving the governor's yamen, Fan Xian climbed into the carriage. He furrowed his brows and supported his chin with his hand. He began to stare blankly. Deng Ziyu glanced at Fan Xian and quietly said, "We have people watching the Ming Garden the entire time. I heard that the fourth Ming master hasn't suffered much in the Suzhou government. If we want to enter Ming Garden to capture people, we can do it ourselves. Actually, we don't necessarily need the governor's manor's help. I'm just afraid we will lose some people." Naturally, Ming Garden had its own thugs and even powerful private military forces. Fan Xian had once glanced at the garden from a distance and knew that with some slight modifications, the garden could become a sturdy castle. If the Overwatch Council wanted to forcefully attack it without the help of the Black Knights, it would be a difficult matter. If Xue Qing did not nod, the Black Knights would not be able to enter deep into the bustling city of Jiangnan. Entering the garden is not difficult. Fan Xian smiled bitterly and shook his head. As long as the Ming family is not prepared to rebel, the Overwatch Council can take my personal letter and enter the garden to search. Would they dare to stop us? What castle and military forces? It's all fake. The old Ming matriarch wouldn't dare to move a single person. His face gradually became cold. But, if we want to enter Ming Garden to capture people, there are two problems. First, we don't know how many aces there are in the Juanshang conference. If that housekeeper Zhou, who knows the inside story of the Juanshang conference, has not been silenced, will those aces protect him from Suzhou? Second, we can't make too much of a ruckus. The Ming family has already shown weakness for a few months. The atmosphere of sorrow is incomparably thick, particularly after the fourth Ming master was captured and brought into the Suzhou government. The Suzhou government has not been released, and the rumors outside are becoming more and more bizarre. Deng Ziyu listened quietly to the side. He knew what the commissioner was worried about. Presently, all of Jiangnan was saying that the Overwatch Council under Fan Xian's command was bullying the Ming family with the intention of taking over their property. It was about to evolve into a story of murder and theft. One had to have a good reason for going against the Ming family. However, the court's reason for dealing with the Ming family had never been straightened out. Thus, in Jiangnan, from the gentry to the common people, they all began to stare at Fan Xian with wary and disgusted gazes. The reputation Fan Xian had built in Jingdou for 2 years had already been greatly polluted. Ming Qingda is a smart person. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and said, "This move of retreating in order to advance is indeed beautiful. It looks like they are only retreating, but we are still pressing forward step by step. In the eyes of the common people, their emotions will always be biased. Furthermore, the Ming family has deep roots in Jiangnan. Their ability to mobilize public opinion is much stronger than our own 8th Bureau." Ever since they knew that housekeeper Zhou was hiding in Ming Garden, the Overwatch Council Palace Treasury Transport Company's attacks on the Ming family became more and more ferocious. The Ming family's property was endlessly harassed and gradually looked like the sun was setting in the west. It looked incomparably pitiful. Public opinion is a very important matter. Reputation is also very important, Fan Xian sighed. If we continue to suppress the Ming family like this, not only will the common people be disgusted with me, even the royal merchants that Xia Qifei is in contact with will probably grow wary of the court. No one knows whether or not they will become the second Ming family. What gives me the biggest headache is... He shook his head. Right now, we are not clear about the situation in the capital. I don't know if we make too big of a move, too many people will die, and too much criticism will be stirred up. Will it give the people in the capital an excuse to move me back? With the situation in Jiangnan still unsettled, Fan Xian did not want to return to the capital, particularly since he would be held back by the women in the palace. It was not a situation he could accept. When the carriage arrived at Hua Garden, he said a few words to the third prince and the others. Then he brought Deng Ziyu and a few trusted aides into the study. He spread out a map on the large desk and began to think deeply. Fan Xian thought for a while and then used his finger to point at a certain city on the map. In a quiet voice, he asked, "Has the news from Chuanzhou come back?" The home of the concubine of the direct heir of the Ming family, Ming Launcher, was in a village next to Chuanzhou. The Overwatch Council had already investigated that the brother of the concubine had been on the East Sea the entire time. He was responsible for the Ming family's pirate business and robbing their own merchant ships. The head of the pirates had already been silenced by the military people the Ming family had colluded with. The concubine had also disappeared. In the words of the Ming family, she had gone home to visit relatives. Of course, the Overwatch Council knew this was a lie. But who could expose this lie? That concubine did not return to the village, a member of the Chinian unit reported. A member of the Chinian unit reported, "We didn't find any traces of bandits along the way. They were probably killed in Suzhou." Fan Xian nodded. This was something he had long expected, so he was not surprised. Straightforwardly, he asked, "What is important is that since that village was the pirate's home, there must have been people who followed him onto the island to become bandits. Those relatives must have some understanding of this matter. Since the Ming family had bathed that island in blood, those villagers would not foolishly stand on the side of the Ming family." A glimmer of shame flashed across the face of the member of the Chinian unit. "That village is already empty." Fan Xian furrowed his brows tightly. The village was empty? There was no need to ask for a reason. Since it was empty, it could not be separated from those dirty tricks. What about the families here? His finger was still pointing directly at Chuanzhou. Furrowing his brows, he asked, "The officials of the shipping department were killed by those pirates. When did those families come to the Suzhou government to report?" Another member of the Chinian unit replied in a heavy voice, "Most of those families have already returned to the mainland. Only a few are still in Chuanzhou. However, the people of the 4th Bureau went to ask probingly. Those families received a large sum of compensation. Their desire to pursue the pirates has faded. What is important is, the Ming family has indeed treated them well. They do not believe the Ming family would collude with the pirates." Fan Xian was startled. Shortly after, he said with slight mockery, "Of course not collusion. The Ming family is the pirates." Immediately after, he asked a few more about the previous arrangements of the 4th Bureau and received not very good answers. Only now did he know that after he cut down the Cui family in Jingdou and during the days when Yan Bingyun was plotting against the Ming family had already made sufficient preparations. They did not leave behind too many loopholes. Fan Xian sat down on the slightly cold chair. In his hands, he held a bowl of warm tea as his thoughts wandered. His subordinate looked at the commissioner in silence, not knowing what to say. It looked like it would be difficult to bring down the Ming family in a short amount of time if he took the open and above-board path. However, he had to use the Overwatch Council's dirty methods. After all, Jiangnan was not other places. He had to worry about the reaction of the people. If it really caused the entire population to take to the streets for a walk, it would be difficult for the Overwatch Council to clean up. Thinking of this, Fan Xian began to feel angry at Xue Qing's indecisiveness. If the Jiangnan governor appeared and he followed from behind, one in the light and one in the dark, one red face and one white face, perhaps this matter would be much simpler. However, Fan Xian did not feel too defeated. He knew that in the battle between the court and the Ming family could forever only stand on the passive defensive side. Fan Xian had plenty of time to slowly play with the Ming family. The reason he was in a hurry to enter Ming Garden was because he wanted to clearly investigate the role of the Juanshan Conference. In the battle with the Ming family, he could endlessly try to bring them down. Even if he did not succeed once, he could try again after resting for a while. But the Ming family could not. This large family could not be defeated even once. Once they were defeated, they would be wiped out. Get ready. Fan Xian lowered his eyelids slightly and said, "Get ready to enter the garden to capture people at any time." Deng Ziyu hesitated for a moment and then said, "Not waiting for Governor Xue to make his stance clear?" Fan Xian smiled coldly and said, "When I do things, I never like to follow in other people's footsteps. I've waited for 10 days and given Xue Qing enough face. If I act now, he can't blame me for being ruthless." What about the Jiangnan people's discussion? Discussion? They say I'm bullying the Ming family? I'll go in gently and gently. I won't hit a single person and won't kill a single person. How am I bullying them? A glimmer of a smile appeared on Fan Xian's face. Besides, I've thought it through. Something like reputation, once it's ruined in Jiangnan, I'll slowly pick it back up in the future. Fan Xian waited for 10 days not because he did not have the confidence to enter Ming Garden and capture housekeeper Zhou. It was not purely because he had misgivings about discussion or because he wanted to wait for Xue Qing to make his stance clear. More importantly, he was waiting for news from Jingdou. After the palace treasury bidding, he knew clearly that the eldest princess faction in Jingdou would launch an attack on the Ministry of Revenue. He was waiting for the result of this matter. The matter was in Jiangnan, but the commander was in Jingdou. As long as the situation in Jingdou was unclear, it would be difficult for Fan Xian to act in Jiangnan. The next day, birds cried out from the willow branches. 3 fast horses charged into Suzhou under the cover of dawn. The bailiffs guarding the city only knew that the people coming were secret agents of the Overwatch Council and did not dare to stop them. The sound of hooves thundered as they charged outside Suzhou's Hua Garden. Someone had long led the 3 riders into the garden. This was the Overwatch Council's fastest way to send news. It was many times faster than the Qing Court's courier service. Fan Xian held the council report Mu Tai had sent from the capital and was slightly happy. He knew that the result of the matter was as he had guessed. The Ministry of Revenue was fine, and the eldest princess side had suffered a great loss. However, as intelligent as he was, he could clearly see that the emperor wanted to use the opportunity to have the old Fan family in Jingdou leave the stage. His slightly happy face immediately darkened. However, he didn't have time to think about his father's matter. Fan Xian shook his head and said to the Overwatch Council official beside him who had been receiving orders the entire time, "Enter Ming Garden and arrest them." The Overwatch Council official accepted the order and left. For a moment, a number of officials came out from the yamen all around Suzhou. The hooves of horses shattered the silence of the morning. Outside the city, 40 or so Overwatch Council officials rode openly and directly toward Ming Garden under Deng Ziyu's lead. "Be careful," Fan Xian turned his head and warmly said. "No one knows who else the Juanshan Conference has left in Jiangnan." Lady Haitong's 2 hands were in the large pockets of her flowery clothing. She tilted her head and smiled. Early in the morning outside Suzhou, after the early birds chirped once, they returned to the trees to sleep. It was quiet all around the road, particularly around the beautiful and spacious Ming Garden. One could only hear the faint sound of water being poured and washing coming from inside. Everything was the same as any other day. Suddenly, dozens of riders came galloping along the road. The people on the horses were all wearing the robes of the Overwatch Council. Following the arrival of these dozens of riders outside the Ming Garden, the secret agents of the Overwatch Council who were responsible for monitoring the surroundings of the Ming Garden also appeared from the trees and behind the mountain. Some of them merged into their colleagues who had come to inspect the garden, while some of the spies disappeared without a trace. Deng Ziyu's serious face sank as he rode his horse to the front gate of Ming Garden. He flipped down from his horse. His subordinates behind him also dismounted in unison. At this moment, Ming Garden was as quiet as a shy virgin. However, Deng Ziyu could clearly see that on the inner side of the low perimeter wall, there was a metallic light shining with a soul-devouring light. On the high ground to the left, he could see longbows and crossbows. The other party was already waiting in formation. If they fired in unison, not a single one of these dozens of Overwatch Council officials would be able to return alive. However, Deng Ziyu's expression did not change because he believed in the commissioner's judgment. Although the Ming family were bandits in their bones, they would not be stupid enough to initiate a firefight when faced with the Overwatch Council. As expected, the front gate of Ming Garden was slowly pulled open. The young master of the Ming family, Ming Launcher, whose eyes were slightly red and who seemed to have not slept all night, stood respectfully by the gate. He spread out his right hand and said, "Everyone please. My condition this week has not been right. My writing has been rather rough. There was a chapter at the beginning that I was not very satisfied with. Everyone knows that I am a person who is easily affected by emotions. My apologies. The day before yesterday, I received news that a cousin of mine passed away. She was not more than 40 years old. I have a feeling that life is impermanent and do not need consolation. Perhaps it is relief. If you want to know what happened after, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support original reading." Chapter 395. Report. The carriage stopped 2 streets away from the Suzhou government. The Tiger Guards cautiously watched the movements around them. An Overwatch Council secret agent wearing commoner clothing leaned over and examined the token. He moved closer to the carriage window and spoke in a quiet voice. In the carriage, Fan Xian was holding something and reading it closely. He nodded and said, "Speak." Ming Garden has not resisted. The people of the 4th Bureau have already gone in and are currently searching. For now, there are no results. Fan Xian thought for a moment and then said, "Pay attention to propriety. Tell Ziyu not to be too arrogant." The secret agent made a sound of acknowledgement and turned to leave the carriage, disappearing into the morning crowd in Suzhou. The carriage slowly began to move again. It had traveled half a street in the direction of the Suzhou government. Another Overwatch Council secret agent flashed out from the corner of the street and came to the side of the carriage. Lowering his voice, he reported, "There are no unusual movements at the docks." Fan Xian was silent and waved his hand to let the person go. From Hua Garden to the Suzhou government, they had to pass through half of Suzhou. Along the way, the carriage moved silently and did not attract much attention. Most of the people of Suzhou did not know that this morning, the Overwatch Council officials had already charged into Ming Garden like wolves and tigers. During this distance, the crows that the Overwatch Council had temporarily mobilized began to report news from all sides. All of the information related to the Ming family's response was gathered into this moving carriage. For example, the situation in Ming Garden, the situation of the Ming merchant house opening as usual, and the response of the governor's yamen. All of it was sent as quickly as possible into the carriage and handed over to Fan Xian for him to consider. In other words, this carriage was the central tent of the Overwatch Council's operation. Fan Xian also felt a glimmer of strangeness. Even if the Ming family was showing weakness, they could not be bullied to the point where they had not made any moves to retaliate. On the contrary, it was the governor's yamen that was beginning to grow nervous. There were already rumors of troops being mobilized. In today's plan, seeing the Ming family's response was one thing. Capturing that housekeeper Zhou was the most important. During these few days, Ming Garden had been under the Overwatch Council's close surveillance. Housekeeper Zhou should not have had any chance to escape. Most importantly, the Ming family still did not know that the news of housekeeper Zhou hiding in Ming Garden had already been grasped by the Overwatch Council. Thinking of this, a self-mocking smile rose involuntarily to the corners of Fan Xian's lips. In this world of large families, if they fought their way in from the outside, they would always be like a centipede with 100 legs. They would not die immediately, but if they fought from within, then they would face true difficulties. This was something Chao Shuaqin had said in Dream of the Red Chamber. The reason he had such a sigh now was because the place housekeeper Zhou was hiding was a member of the Ming family. A very powerful person within the Ming family had told Fan Xian through some channel. Otherwise, Given the tight defenses of Ming Garden and the fact that the Overwatch Council had not successfully placed a spy from the upper echelons in a dozen years, how could they have calculated that housekeeper Zhou was in Ming Garden? As long as steward Zhou was in Ming Garden, today's matter could be considered a success. The carriage gradually approached the Suzhou government. Another secret agent from the Overwatch Council came to report some news. There was nothing else strange. The carriage entered an unremarkable little alley and leaned against a thick wall, stopping there. No one knew what it was doing. About 100 feet to the side of the Suzhou Yamen was the prison that held the prisoners. The prison killed people in the autumn and raised them in the spring. Right now, it was a time of prosperity. There were 40 to 50 people locked up in one prison. Going in through the iron gate of the prison, all the way to the end of the straight path, there was a place where sunlight shone down from above, slightly warming the place and dispersing some of the dampness. Compared to the other dark and sunless prison cells, this place was much more comfortable. This prison cell was padded with hay. Under the hay, one could faintly see forbidden blankets and the like. A middle-aged man was drinking alone with a deathly pale face, enjoying a treatment that normal prisoners could not enjoy. This was the fourth master of the Ming family. Because the Overwatch Council wanted to defeat the Ming family, he had become the first person to be used as a sacrifice. He had been forcefully locked up in the Suzhou government. It had already been a dozen days, and there was still no news of him being let out. However, the Ming family was, after all, a large and powerful family. It was as if the Suzhou government was being raised by them. Living in the prison, there were people taking care of everything from top to bottom. His days were considered comfortable. In the prison cell next to him were a number of great bandits. They all looked at him with envious gazes. The fourth master of the Ming dynasty was too lazy to pay attention to those bandits. He only narrowed his eyes and looked at the three bailiffs outside the prison door. A mocking smile appeared at the corner of his lips and he said, "What is it today?" The prison door was opened with a clang by the bailiffs. One of the bailiffs bowed and smiled charmingly. "Fourth master, it's been hard on you these days. However, the Overwatch Council is keeping a close eye, so it's not easy for us to arrange a single room for you." The fourth master of the Ming dynasty shook his head and sighed. Being able to get out earlier is the proper thing. Did the family say anything? At this moment, two other bailiffs had already brought in good food and good wine. They laid it out in front of him, and the fragrance assailed his nostrils. The fourth master of the Ming dynasty was slightly surprised. It was not even lunchtime yet, so why had they come so early to deliver food? Suddenly he thought of something. His expression couldn't help changing dramatically. In a raspy voice, he said, "What do you mean? After eating this meal, you should be on your way." The bailiff sighed. The fourth master of the Ming dynasty's face was deathly pale. He didn't quite believe his ears. He thought to himself that at most, he was a tyrant and did not deserve the death penalty. Furthermore, he was a member of the Ming family. How could the government dare to casually kill him? He unconsciously retreated and looked hatefully at the bailiffs. Viciously, he said, "What do you mean? I don't understand." The bailiffs lowered his head slightly and said, "It is the Overwatch Council's meaning. Fourth master, please don't blame me." The fourth master of the Ming dynasty was not a foolish person. After thinking for a moment, he understood the whole story. After a moment of silence, he smiled wretchedly and said, "What Overwatch Council? I'm afraid the family wants to kill me." The bailiff straightened his body and lowered his voice. "Since you understand, then don't mind it too much. It's not for the good of the family. The Overwatch Council is pressuring the family tightly. I heard they already entered the garden this morning. If we don't do something and make a ruckus, how could the Overwatch Council be willing to stop? You are the fourth master. Using your life to temporarily ensure the safety of the family for half a year is worth it." The fourth master cursed angrily, "You bastards! If you want to die, why don't you let the old matriarch die? I'll *CK her ancestors." He had already reached a moment of life and death. Of course, he knew why the Ming family would send people to kill him. This was certainly not to silence him. He had no idea about the core business of the family. This was just a stroke of ink. A stroke of ink smeared on the face of the Overwatch Council. From the end of last year, the Ming family had planned to show weakness and sorrowful battle. They needed to use the death of the fourth master of the Ming family as the opportunity to explode. Thinking of this, his heart was filled with despair, dissatisfaction, and anger. The expression of the bailiffs changed and he said, "The old matriarch is the protector of the Ming family. Fourth master, please be more respectful with your words." The fourth master smiled wretchedly and retreated to the corner of the wall. Cursing and swearing in his mouth, he said, "I am also a master of the Ming family. Why must I die? Just because I am not her biological son?" Two bailiffs had already walked to the side of the fourth master. Completely ignoring his cursing and resistance, they took out a ball of dirty rag and stuffed it into his mouth, blocking his filthy words. At the same time, they tied his hands behind his back. The ruckus in the inner room had startled the entire prison. Many prisoners looked over with curiosity and fear. The leading bailiffs furrowed his brows and shouted, "The Overwatch Council is doing business. Everyone be quiet." Even though they were locked up in prison, these prisoners knew that the Overwatch Council was currently suppressing the Ming family. No one had thought that the Overwatch Council would go deep into the prison to assassinate the fourth master. They couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts and gradually felt injustice for the Ming family. However, no one dared to glance in that direction for fear of bringing trouble upon themselves. The bailiffs looked at the plate of food in front of him and shook his head. Regretfully, he said, "You can't even eat your last meal well. It has been hard on you." After saying this, he waved his hand. The two bailiffs holding the fourth master took out ropes and wrapped them around the fourth master's neck. The fourth master's neck was tied, and his face was red from the suffocation. His feet stomped endlessly on the ground, sending the hay flying everywhere and dirtying the quilt below. The ropes became tighter and tighter. The fourth master's eyes seemed to bulge out of their sockets. His nostrils flared wide. He looked strangely terrifying. The strength of his feet stomping also became weaker and weaker. He was like a dying frog, bouncing weakly. One could imagine the hopelessness in the heart of the dying fourth master. One could imagine the hatred he felt toward the old woman of the Ming family and Ming Qingda. However, he was already going to die. What could he do? The bailiffs, looking coldly at the dying fourth master, suddenly felt strange. Out of the corner of his eye, he glanced at the cell nearby. The prisoner was looking at him. The prisoner was looking at him coldly. It did not seem like he was cold-blooded watching the spectacle. There was also not a glimmer of fear. He turned around in astonishment and saw the prisoner take out something from the pile of hay and aim it at him. Crossbow. Shing shing shing. 3 crossbow noises rang out. 3 crossbow bolts flew out and accurately pierced the throats of the 3 bailiffs. The 3 of them clutched their throats. They didn't even have time to make a sound before they fell to the ground. Their feet stomped twice and they died. Once the bailiffs died, the ropes loosened. The already dying fourth master's powerless feet gradually regained strength. He slowly opened his eyes and glanced at the prisoner next door with a confused and muddy gaze. He didn't know why the other party had saved him, nor did he see clearly how the other party had saved him. The prisoner seemed to have done nothing. His eyes were looking straight ahead as he crouched by the bars. The fourth master's entire body was sore and weak. His pants were wet and smelly, but he knew he had escaped death. At this moment, the thick wall behind him, as if it was being manipulated by a ghost, quietly opened up a hole, revealing the clear blue sky outside. Gouda pulled back his long knife. His face was slightly pale. Forcefully breaking through the thick walls of the Suzhou government prison had also used up a lot of his jinchi. He entered the prison cell, picked up the fourth master with one hand, and left the prison. Another Overwatch Council official entered and pulled out the crossbow bolts from the throats of the 3 bailiffs. He then carefully arranged the situation in the prison cell before walking to the side of the bars and extending his hand. The prisoner who had saved the fourth master's life earlier did not say a word. He handed the hidden crossbow in his hand to the Overwatch Council official's hand and pointed at the food box beside him. The Overwatch Council official picked up a chicken leg and placed it in his hand. The prisoner smiled with satisfaction. The Overwatch Council official lowered his voice and said, "Wait another 2 months. Sir still needs you as a witness." The prisoner nibbled on the chicken leg and nodded. Not long after the Overwatch Council official left, the prisoner flicked the rest of the chicken leg into a cell diagonally across from him. Suddenly, his face changed, and he cried out in a shrill voice, "Help! Save me! Someone is killing and breaking into the prison." The carriage left the small alley behind the Suzhou government and slowly drove toward the governor's yamen. However, there was now an extra person in the carriage. The fourth master sat paralyzed in fear under the carriage chair. He raised his head to gaze at the young and handsome figure and was speechless for a moment. Fan Xian shook his head and sighed. Rich and powerful families are indeed always filthy and dirty. Shortly after, he smiled slightly and said, "Now that you've seen it clearly, I don't need to say more. In the future, you have to grasp the Ming family well and work well with the seventh master." The fourth master swallowed. The scene of him narrowly escaping death had given him too much psychological impact. It did not allow him to think at all. He nodded his head fiercely. Fan Xian said in a quiet voice, "The old matriarch wants to kill you and blame it on the Overwatch Council. She wants to spread it to the people and create an image of me as shameless and cold-blooded. She wants to stir up the emotions of the people to protect the Ming family, but now that I've saved you, she has instead blamed the Ming family for breaking into the prison. What do you think she will do?" The fourth master's eyes were lifeless. He shook his head and endured the pain in his throat. In a hoarse voice, he said, "Sir, don't underestimate that old be asterisk. So, my condition is not just a problem of my mental state. I've caught a cold, a bad cold. Hissing pain. I've written less, but the quality seems to be better. My satisfaction is rising." To be continued. If you want to know what happened afterwards, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 396. Regardless of whether you should be dead right now or have been kidnapped by the Ming family, Fan Xian sat in the carriage and looked outside. Fan Xian sat in the carriage and looked outside. In a quiet voice, he said, "In any case, during this period of time, it is impossible for you to appear in front of people again. The council has already arranged a place for you. Hide well and come out after this matter has settled." The fourth master weakly made a sound of acknowledgement. Fan Xian turned his head and glanced at him. He couldn't resist shaking his head. "When I asked seventh Ming to meet you, you should have agreed. Why did you have to suffer such a fright?" The fourth master gritted his teeth and said in a raspy voice, "No one would have thought that mother and son would be so ruthless." Fan Xian shook his head somewhat helplessly. For such a large family to survive, they need many sacrifices. The fourth master fell silent. His hand touched his red, tight, and aching throat. He knew that he was nothing more than a sacrifice and didn't have much right to ask for anything. When the carriage was halfway through its original journey, another carriage picked up the fourth master from Fan Xian's carriage. Only Fan Xian and a few people from the Chinian unit were left in the carriage. The 7 tiger guards followed Gao Da's arrangement and scattered around the carriage, concealing their tracks. "Sir, where do we go next?" the subordinate asked in a low voice. Fan Xian thought for a bit and then said, "Wait another hour and send an invitation to the governor's manor. I want to see Xue Qing again." His gaze landed on the subordinate's face and asked, "Has the arrangement in the prison been completed?" The subordinate said in a low voice, "Yes. Furthermore, the Suzhou government has people watching. The Ming family cannot escape the crime of breaking into the prison only. Speak directly." Fan Xian furrowed his brows. "I don't understand. If the Ming family wanted to kill the fourth Ming master and frame the council, there was no need to do it so exaggerated." Fan Xian shook his head. "The method is not important. What is important is the timing. Today, the Overwatch Council entered the Ming garden to search. The fourth master died in the prison. No matter how he died or how the Ming family arranged the aftermath, as long as he died and someone found his body, all of the Jiangnan gentry and common people would think it was me who did it." He smiled and said, "The Ming family, have been waiting for me to lose my patience and enter the Ming garden so they could throw out this abandoned pawn. However, now that the fourth Ming disciple is not dead, I am truly curious. How will the Ming family continue to play the tragic card? The carriage slowly came to a stop. The morning sunlight of Suzhou City gently and warmly shone on the long street, shining on people's hearts, and then on the roof of this black four-wheeled carriage, as if to brush away the coldness in the hearts of the people sitting inside. Estimating that Ming garden was already in a commotion, Fan Xian lifted the curtain and got off the carriage. The tiger guards gathered around and walked toward the tall governor's yamen. An official of the Overwatch Council had already handed over a name card, so the yamen gatekeeper did not dare to stop them. An advisor hurriedly walked out and welcomed them in. It was still in that study. There was still only Governor Xueqing and Imperial Envoy Fan Xian. Fan Xian very straightforwardly expressed his intentions and informed the other party that the Overwatch Council people had already entered Ming garden. Hearing this reality that had already happened, the corners of Governor Xueqing's eyes furrowed imperceptibly. He then sighed and slowly said, "There are many things that cannot be done quickly." Going down to Jiangnan to deal with the Ming family was the Qing Emperor's established policy. Fan Xian was only a specific executor. As the Emperor's trusted aide, Xueqing knew the origins of this matter. However, in terms of specific measures, he was very different from Fan Xian. The court did not set a timetable for taking in the Ming family. For the Emperor, he believed he still had a lot of time and enough patience to slowly eat up the large clans in Jiangnan. Correspondingly, Xueqing did not want to act in too much of a hurry. He had always been conciliatory in order to avoid making too much of a ruckus, messing up Jiangnan, and shaking the foundation of the court's rule. Thus, Xueqing's mood was not very good regarding the matter of Fan Xian directly entering the yamen and saying he had already entered Ming garden. He still did not understand why Fan Xian was in such a rush. He was clearly a young noble not even 20 years old. What was there to be afraid of wasting a few years? There was another glimmer of anger in his chest. He understood that Fan Xian's action was to force him onto the boat to take a knife. The Overwatch Council had already entered Ming garden. If the two sides fought, as the governor of Jiangnan rode, he had to ensure peace no matter what. Then, he had to do what he needed to do. A few days ago, Xueqing had not relented because he did not have much confidence in dealing with the Ming family. Furthermore, he was afraid of the rumors in the capital. Now that he had been played by Fan Xian, his anger gradually rose. In a low voice, he said, "If trouble arises, who will be responsible?" Fan Xian thought quietly for a moment and then seriously said, "There shouldn't be any trouble." Xueqing glanced at him coldly and said, "It's not that I'm being arrogant, but no matter how you look at it, I am still one of your elders. You didn't handle this matter carefully enough. The Ming family has already shown weakness for half a year, waiting for you to bully them. Now that you have already bullied their way in, how could they miss this opportunity?" Fan Xian shook his head. "Once we've entered Ming garden, what can they do?" Xueqing lowered his eyelids slightly and said, "Although the court has always known that the Ming family keeps 1,000 private soldiers, they have always turned a blind eye to the service they have performed for the court. It was not difficult for a large family of tens of thousands of people to use all kinds of names to raise 1,000 private soldiers." However, Fan Xian couldn't help smiling coldly when he heard these words. "Is it for the court or for the Juanshang conference?" Hearing the words, Juanshang conference, Xueqing fell silent. For such a mysterious and limitless power organization to appear in the Jiangnan under his rule, it had to be said that he had failed in his duty. The emperor had already severely reprimanded him in the secret letter he had sent. Xueqing understood that Fan Xian was using the name of the Juanshang conference to pressure him. He could only helplessly shake his head and say, "Where exactly are your plans?" Fan Xian was silent for a moment and then said, "The Ming family was prepared to kill the fourth Ming disciple and plant it on the Overwatch Council. I stopped this matter." "In the Suzhou government?" Xueqing was slightly startled. Only now did he understand why Fan Xian appeared to have a card up his sleeve. 1,000 private soldiers. As long as the Ming family does not raise the flag and rebel, I will only send 40 people in, and they won't dare to move. Fan Xian continued to smile slightly and said, "Don't they like to play retreat in order to advance? I want to see just how far they can retreat." Shui Qing half closed his eyes and said, "They really won't dare to move? What you have is not an imperial edict." Fan Xian responded with equal harshness, "I have not taken an imperial edict, but I have the emperor's sword." Shui Qing lightly said, "As long as a few more people die in the Ming Garden and adjust their emotions, it is not impossible for them to bury your 40 Overwatch Council secret agents in the Ming Garden." The emperor's sword? The Ming Garden can find enough excuses to argue that they did not know of this and only thought that Sir Fan Jr. of the Overwatch Council wanted to kill and steal property, so they were forced to retaliate. Don't forget, the Ming family has laid the groundwork very well these few months. For something like this to happen at this time, everyone under heaven will believe them. These words stabbed into Fan Xian's heart. If the Ming family was truly forced into a corner, it was not as if they could not do such a crazy thing. Given the Ming family's foundation in Jiangnan and support in the capital, they could completely shed all pretenses of cordiality with Fan Xian. Furthermore, the Overwatch Council had entered the Ming Garden first. Even if the two sides fought openly, public opinion would completely fall on the Ming family's side. Unexpectedly, Fan Xian did not seem to care about this at all. There was not a trace of emotion on that young and handsome face. Shui Qing couldn't help but furrow his brows. Fan Xian finally opened his mouth. There was a faint self-mockery at the corner of his lips. The Ming family is waiting for me to act, and I am also waiting for the Ming family to act. As long as we shed all pretenses, if they actually dare to touch my subordinates, no matter what, I will frame them as rebelling. Regardless of whether the people under heaven believe it or not, I will place this hat on the head of that old Ming matriarch. To say such a perverted thing in front of the governor, Fan Xian could not be said to not be daring. However, his following words made Shui Qing feel a glimmer of coldness. Naturally, no one would believe they would rebel. Fan Xian smiled slightly and said, "However, once we act, the Black Knights that have been staying in Jiangbei will come. I will kill everyone in the Ming Garden. As long as everyone in the 6th branch is dead, who will cry out for them? The Jiangnan people or the Jiangnan gentry?" He continued to calmly say, "Even if they cry out for their grievances all the way to Jingdou, so what? Even if they file a lawsuit before the emperor, so what? I have killed everyone in the 6th branch. There is only Xia Qifei left. At most, there will be the 4th Ming prince as an ornament. The court will still have the Ming family property in their hands. As long as the goal is reached, it doesn't matter if the methods are dirty." He turned his head and stared into Shui Qing's eyes. "I trust that if 40 people of the Overwatch Council died and I moved the Black Knights to Suzhou, you wouldn't still stop me, would you?" Shui Qing's pupils constricted slightly. If things really developed like this and the Overwatch Council threw in 40 officials, and he still had to forcefully stop the Black Knights from going south, he was afraid that the Overwatch Council would truly fly into a rage and anger the old man in the wheelchair. Even if he was the governor, he probably wouldn't have a good end. Looking at Fan Xian's warm and pure eyes, Shui Qing felt an inexplicable chill in his heart. He had a completely new understanding of the young official beside him. It turned out that Commissioner Fan of the Overwatch Council was indeed a powerful figure who killed without blinking. The way the younger generation did things was indeed sufficiently crazy. "What about you?" After massacring Ming Garden, Fan Xian would not have a good ending. However, Shui Qing still did not believe that Sir Fan Jr. would gamble with the Ming family on this. "Me. At most, I'll have all my titles removed, lose my official position, and be demoted to a commoner, at the very least, banished 3,000 li away?" Fan Xian seemed to be thinking about his own end and laughed out loud. "It's not like you don't know. I can go anywhere in the world." Shui Qing couldn't resist shaking his head and sighing. "Then the 40 subordinates you sent into Ming Garden, were they all abandoned?" Fan Xian closed his eyes and shook his head. "Not so. I am only talking about the worst ending. However, I believe that given the shrewdness of the mother and son of the Ming family, they would certainly not make such a choice. Thus, I am very curious. How exactly is the Ming family prepared to deal with this?" It's like playing cards. I don't think I'm going to win this round, but I'm very curious as to what card my opponent is going to play. He opened his eyes and said with a smile, "Sometimes, I have the curiosity of a gambler. I am also beginning to become curious." Shui Qing's eyelids jumped slightly. "I hope your judgment is not wrong. The Juanshang Conference accountant surnamed Zhou is still in Ming Garden." "Don't worry." Fan Xian encouraged the governor. "I have people in Ming Garden." Shui Qing furrowed his brows. He didn't know who exactly Fan Xian was hiding in Ming Garden. Given his identity, it was not convenient for him to ask, so he closed his mouth and didn't say anything more. The two leading figures of the Jiangnan officials sat silently in the study, waiting for news from Ming Garden. They didn't have to wait for long before the news came. The advisor of the governor's manor moved closer to Shui Qing's side and whispered for a while. Shui Qing fell silent. He then gazed at Fan Xian and sighed. "The cards the other party has played seem to have exceeded your expectations. I am going to start moving troops." Fan Xian furrowed his brows slightly. Shui Qing continued to smile bitterly and said, "Moving troops is for the safety of your subordinates and not to prevent you from massacring the garden." Shui Qing knew he didn't need to explain it to him in detail. His face was still full of shock as he hurriedly left the study. Fan Xian stood and heard the whole story from the mouth of the Qinian unit member outside the door. The Overwatch Council's news should be faster than the governor's manners. After all, he was in the manor, so the message was sent slower. After Fan Xian heard of what happened in Ming Garden, he still couldn't help but be like Governor Shui Qing. A shocked expression appeared on his face. His mouth opened slightly and he sighed, "Ruthless, even more ruthless than what I did." He was prepared to curse out to vent the absurd feeling in the depths of his heart. In the end, he endured it. He smiled bitterly and shook his head. His expression gradually became calm. He then gave out an order. "Have Deng Ziyu pull everyone back. Don't retaliate when hit. Don't retaliate when scolded." The official of the Qinian unit accepted the order and left. Fan Xian followed him out of the door of the governor's yamen. He saw that the inside of the yamen was a mess. Most of the officials who didn't know the inside story looked at each other. They didn't know why the governor had chosen this time to inspect the governance of the city and why he had called all of the military officials in the city into the manor to discuss matters. Fan Xian had the right to participate in the discussion, but he knew that it was not suitable for him to stay in the governor's manor. The storm that was about to arrive would have to be dealt with by Sir Shui Qing, while he should go and do other things. Climbing into the carriage, Fan Xian rubbed the space between his brows and suddenly said something to Tiger Guard Gouda that had no head or tail. Actually, a lot of the time, how a matter goes is completely dependent on the order of the people who die. Gouda paused. He didn't understand what the commissioner was talking about. Fan Xian scratched his head and said, "Clearly, I want him to die. If he kills himself before I let him die, then we will actually have problems." "Who died?" Gouda furrowed his brows and asked. "The great-grandmother in the eyes of the Jiangnan people, the old matriarch of the Ming family who has saved countless poor people," Fan Xian said with a slight smile. Because she couldn't stand the humiliation of the Overwatch Council entering the garden and Sir Fan Jr.'s many days of oppression, she angrily hanged herself this morning. The old Ming matriarch killed herself? Gouda sank into shock. Although he was from Jingdo, he knew what kind of prestige and position this old ancestor of the Ming family had in the entirety of Jiangnan. Using death to demonstrate her will, Fan Xian laughingly scolded. "Ming Qingda is truly ruthless, even more ruthless than his mother." In reality, the old Ming matriarch did not want to die. Of course, this was nonsense. No one in this world wanted to die. Even though the old Ming matriarch was already old and her breath of life had flowed out for many years, she had enough of enjoying her life in Jiangnan, but she still did not want to die. The Ming family's reputation in Jiangnan was very good. They had done countless good deeds such as opening shops, giving out porridge, and sponsoring students. In people's hearts, this old Ming matriarch was like a benevolent old immortal in the clouds. Her entire body was wrapped in a sweet and glowing clothing. It was to the extent that among the Jiangnan people and even in some remote places, There were people who had begun to erect shrines for this old Ming matriarch. It was clear that the old Ming matriarch did not connect the shrines to her lifespan. She also did not think that since the shrines had been erected, how many more days could she, or should she live? Recently, all of her attention had been focused on dealing with the Overwatch Council's all-pervasive coercion. She had long drawn up a corresponding plan. On this beautiful morning, hearing that the Overwatch Council's secret agents had entered the garden to search, the old woman's face was filled with anger. She cursed, after Ming Garden was built, how could there be a government search? Even if the governor enters the manor, he has to maintain etiquette. These bastards of the Overwatch Council. The little courtyard she lived in was far away in the deepest part of Ming Garden. She could not hear the clamor of the Overwatch Council searching in front of her. However, this feeling of humiliation still made her angry. Narrowing her eyes, she said, "You plan to let our family be bullied like this?" Standing beside her was the current master of the Ming family in name, the eldest son of the eldest branch, Ming Qingda. His face was slightly ashen. He knew what his mother meant and replied in a small voice, "He has already gone. However, after all, fourth is still a brother." The old Ming matriarch glanced at her son coldly and with disgust. She thought, if you are not ruthless, how can you accomplish great things? How can you allow your family to struggle at death's door under the Overwatch Council's powerful attacks and endure until the day the capital turns the tables? You have to be ruthless. The old Ming matriarch lectured. Ming Qingda glanced at his mother's wrinkled face. A filial smile appeared on his face and he made a sound of acknowledgement. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 397. The Overwatch Council broke into the garden like this today for Sir Zhou. Ming Qingda glanced at his elderly mother and said evenly, "Do you want to?" The old Ming matriarch glanced at him coldly and knew what he meant. Housekeeper Zhou was the head housekeeper of the Ming family and the accountant of the Juanshan conference. This person was too important. If the Overwatch Council found him, many of the inside stories of the Juanshan conference would be grasped by Fan Xian and, indirectly, by the emperor. Regardless of whether it was for the sake of Ming Garden's self-protection or for the safety of the Juanshan conference, Housekeeper Zhou would undoubtedly die. The problem was, the old Ming matriarch sighed gently and said, "It's not like you don't know that this Sir Zhou was sent to our home by the eldest princess. To kill or not to kill, we cannot make a decision." "The search is about to reach the back," Ming Qingda said expressionlessly, but a glimmer of cold laughter flashed through his heart. Juanshan Conference? How could an organization of that level be something a wealthy merchant family like the Ming family should be involved in? As expected, they were now riding a tiger and couldn't escape even if they wanted to. He always had a deep prejudice against the old Ming matriarch and the eldest princess for tying them so tightly. As for the Juanshan Conference, he avoided it even more. The old Ming matriarch slowly closed her eyes and said, "Don't worry. Sir Zhou's safety should be no problem." The old woman suddenly furrowed her brows and said hesitantly, "There is one thing I still don't understand. Why is the imperial envoy so sure that Sir Zhou is still hiding in Ming Garden? If he can't find him, how will he explain it to the people under heaven?" Ming Qingda's heart thumped, but a similar expression of confusion floated to his face. The old Ming matriarch thought for a bit and felt a bit tired. She shook her head weakly. Her white hair made her appear old. "I'm tired," the old woman said with disgust. "Don't let those Overwatch Council dogs disturb my rest." "Don't worry, mother." Ming Qingda walked to her side and placed his hands on her shoulders as if preparing to help her up. Evenly, he said, "In the future, no one will disturb your rest." The old Ming matriarch turned her head in shock and saw the flash of guilt, fear, and ferocity in her son's eyes. Then her mouth was covered, and a leather rope was tied tightly around her throat. The old Ming matriarch wanted to cry out, but she couldn't. Her hands were held tightly by her own son. She could only kick her feet forcefully. That pair of small feet bounced randomly and made popping noises. The old woman's eyes flashed with endless fear and resentment as she stared at the principal maid not far away from her. She did not know how many trusted aides she had in the mansion, but at this moment, none of them were by her side. She did not know where they had died. The servant girl glanced at the old Ming matriarch and slowly turned around. The leather rope around her throat became tighter and tighter. The old Ming matriarch could not breathe. There was a burning pain in her chest, and her eyes began to blur. She knew that everyone had betrayed her. Compared to the betrayal, the strong and thick sense of regret and hatred was even harder to suppress. It flowed out with her tears and saliva from the corners of her mouth. You have to be more ruthless. Of course, sacrifices are needed to achieve great things. All the words rang out again in that instant, accompanied by the ringing in her ears before death, striking the old woman's heart. Her eyes bulged out and stared fixedly at her own son in front of her. Ming Qingda lowered his head and grabbed her hands without making a sound. Perhaps after a long time, or perhaps it was only a short moment, the chest of the old woman sitting in the grand chair, the old Ming matriarch who had secretly influenced and controlled Jiangnan for a dozen years, made a muffled sound. Her body abruptly went limp. Her legs drooped weakly under the chair and no longer moved. When one was old, one should rest. The Overwatch Council's search of Ming Garden did not proceed smoothly. Although no one dared to stop him, Deng Ziyu could already feel the anger in the eyes of the people in Ming Garden growing stronger and stronger. Furthermore, the guards and thugs watching him in the dark could pull out their weapons and charge at him at any moment. Searching the house did not have any gentle methods. Along the way, they overturned chests and cabinets, shouted harshly, and entered people's boudoirs. This appearance indeed had the aura of a vicious wolf. At the same time, it aroused the hostility of everyone in Ming Garden. However, Deng Ziyu was not worried. Commissioner Fan had him enter the garden, so he must have been confident. As expected, although the people in Ming Garden looked at him with loathing and hatred, no one dared to stop him. However, Ming Garden was too big. After searching for a long time, he had only searched half the area. He could not find any trace of housekeeper Zhou's whereabouts. I want to search the back garden, Deng Ziyu said to the young master of the Ming family, Ming Launcher, who had been by his side the entire time. No! Ming Launcher stared fixedly into his eyes and scolded, "What exactly do you want to do? Do you really think the Ming family is so easy to humiliate?" There were women and relatives living in the back garden. How could it be easy to search? Ming Launcher used this as a pretext and angrily scolded the Overwatch Council officials. However, Deng Ziyu's face was heavy. He refused to back down even a step. In his hand, he held the official document personally written by Fan Xian. On it was the seal of the Imperial Envoy. There was sufficient reason to search. Of course, he could not do it in the name of the Overwatch Council. He could only do it in the name of the Jiangnan Road Imperial Envoy. It had to be known that the Overwatch Council could not interfere with local government affairs and, particularly, could not arbitrarily judge civil matters. Today, they were playing a trick of selling dog meat under the sheep's head. It could be said that Fan Xian had borrowed soldiers. The two sides faced off at the door leading into the back garden. The servants and guards in Ming Garden had endured for a long time. At this time, they finally couldn't hold it in any longer. Profanities came out one after another and cursed endlessly. Under their agitated emotions, the thugs and private soldiers that should have been hidden to the side also appeared and surrounded the nearly 40 Overwatch Council officials in the center. Deng Ziyu's face darkened and he coldly said, "Young Master Ming, are you going to continue searching, or are you going to defy the edict?" The Imperial Envoy's journey represented the Emperor's edict. Who dared to defy it? Ming Launcher's face alternated between green and white. He gritted his teeth tightly and pretended to be humiliated and embarrassed. A moment later, he roared angrily, "Go search. The heavens have eyes. I don't believe that the Overwatch Council will not get retribution for bullying people with power." Deng Ziyu did not care about all this. His hand grasping the hilt of the padao, he strode toward the back garden. Unexpectedly, he had not gone more than 10 steps when a person charged out. Although the person was wearing the clothes of a serving girl, Looking at the quality of her clothing and attire, she was also an important figure in Ming Garden. The serving girl's face was deathly pale, and her eyes were lifeless. It was as if she had seen a ghost. She crazily charged toward the crowd. As she charged, she yelled indistinctly, "Dead! Dead! Dead! Dead!" Deng Ziyu's heart jumped. He felt some kind of inauspicious omen. He furrowed his brows and stopped the serving girl. In a stern voice, he asked, "What happened?" The serving girl's face exuded the temperament of a noble family she usually cultivated. However, at this moment, she seemed to be in too much of a shock. It was completely miserable. She trembled for a long time and couldn't say a complete sentence. She could only tremble endlessly in front of Deng Ziyu. If Deng Ziyu had not held onto her arm, she would probably have collapsed to the ground long ago. The people from the Overwatch Council searching the garden did not recognize this serving girl, but the people of the Ming family knew her identity. They knew that she was the old Ming matriarch's personal serving girl and one of her trusted aides. At this moment, the people of the 6th branch were all gathered here. Seeing her like this, they couldn't help but jump in fright. They wondered what had happened. Ming Launcher anxiously snatched the serving girl from Deng Ziyu's hands and grabbed her by the collar. "What is it? Who died?" Deng Ziyu watched from the side with cold eyes. A strange light flashed through his eyes. The serving girl was shaken by the young master and finally came to her senses. She opened her mouth but didn't have time to say anything. First, she wretchedly cried, "What? Oh, the young master, the old matriarch, she... What happened to the old matriarch?" "The old matriarch, she's gone." The serving girl struggled to finish this sentence. Her head tilted and she fainted in Ming Launcher's arms. It was like Ming Launcher had been struck by lightning. He stood dumbstruck where he was. For a moment he couldn't believe his ears. The surrounding disciples of the 6th branch of the Ming family looked at each other with wide eyes and gaping mouths. They were frozen like countless frogs. It was as if they didn't know how to use a shocked expression to express the feelings in their hearts. The old matriarch had gone? The old matriarch had gone. In the deathly silent garden, after an indeterminable amount of time, the first cries suddenly exploded out. Immediately after, the cries rose up like a grand chorus. The cries, wretched cries, and painful curses rose and fell. Many people fell to the ground in shock, unable to stand up no matter how hard they tried. The entire Ming Garden was completely enveloped in shock, grief, and anger. Other than the 4th Ming Master in the Suzhou government prison and the old Ming Master at the old matriarch's side, there were also the masters of the 4th branch present. These 4 men cried and howled. They pushed aside Ming Launcher's dazed body, lifted the robes in front of them, and charged toward the back garden. At this time, no one cared about the rule that one could not enter the back garden without permission. Without anyone needing to shout, the hundreds of people who had appeared in Ming Garden rushed to the back garden with tears in their eyes as they followed the sound of crying like a cloud. The Overwatch Council officials in the center looked at each other and became the most awkward group of people. Deng Ziyu's pupils constricted slightly. He felt danger. He had come under orders to search the garden, but he had not thought that it would turn into such a situation. Although it was not clear how the old Ming matriarch had died, Deng Ziyu knew that her death was too clever and coincidental. It was so clever that the Overwatch Council had no choice but to take responsibility. In that instant earlier, he had seen Ming Launcher's expression out of the corner of his eye. It made a question grow in the depths of his heart. The news of the old Ming matriarch's death shocked everyone in Ming Garden. The guards all charged out and rushed to the side of the Overwatch Council people and surrounded them. They held weapons and crossbows in their hands, and a hateful gaze flashed through their eyes. Deng Ziyu furrowed his brows slightly. He knew that if one of the measures was not taken properly, it would result in a fight between the two sides. However, the commissioner had told him very clearly that the matter should not continue like this. He made a prompt decision and ordered his subordinates, the Overwatch Council officials, to also enter the back garden. In any case, Ming Garden was in chaos. No one had time to worry about them. Furthermore, the Ming Garden private soldiers holding weapons and watching him could not immediately act where the old Ming matriarch was about to die. After walking into the back garden for a long time, Deng Ziyu followed the sound of crying. Outside a quiet and secluded courtyard, he looked at the kneeling people on the ground and couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. Sweeping his gaze, he saw that in the large central room, under the thick beam, there was a person tied under a long white cloth. It was an old woman. The old woman's hands hung by her side with the tips of her feet pointing to the ground. Following the gentle spring wind, she floated in midair. This scene was as strange as it could be. In particular, the pair of eyes that refused to close were protruding outwards. Her pupils were filled with the blood that had been forced out when she was dying. They were filled with hatred and unwillingness as they looked outside. Coincidentally, they were looking at the Overwatch Council officials outside the courtyard. Deng Ziyu was shocked by the gaze of these two dead people. He hurriedly turned his neck and gave an order for his subordinates to be on guard and prepare to break out at any moment. Crying filled the courtyard. The people on the ground knelt and cried blood as they kowtowed endlessly. The old Ming matriarch was completely dead. Ming Garden would certainly hold this debt on the Overwatch Council. At such an impassioned time, no one knew what would happen. However, the way out in the back had long been blocked by Ming Garden's private soldiers. Filled with hatred, it would be extremely difficult to kill their way out. Not long after, Ming Qingda, whose forehead was already bleeding from kowtowing, and the brothers of the fourth branch untied the old matriarch's body from the beam. The current master of the Ming family forcefully suppressed his sorrow and made arrangements for the funeral. Only then did he lead the four brothers out of the courtyard. No one dared to speak, but everyone stared at the Overwatch Council people outside the courtyard with that kind of gaze. In Deng Ziyu's life, he had never found so many people who wanted to eat his flesh. The gazes of the Ming family already displayed this kind of hatred. He knew that this was not the time to retreat. Once he retreated and the news got out, it would bring great danger to the Overwatch Council. Once the old Ming matriarch died, the Overwatch Council people would retreat in fear. If this wasn't a guilty conscience, what was it? Thus, he made his face heavy and narrowed his eyes. The old Ming matriarch colluded with Dong Yi and committed suicide to escape punishment. The funeral will be delayed for now. After the cause of death is investigated, we will deal with it. From the Overwatch Council's point of view, he had to appear particularly unyielding at this time. For the Ming family, the old ancestor had just died and was about to be framed by the Overwatch Council with the crime of committing suicide to escape punishment. No one could endure this. The sixth master of the Ming family liked wrestling the most. He was born big and rough, and his personality was also rough. Additionally, he was the youngest son of the Ming family and had always been the favorite of the old matriarch. His feelings for the old matriarch were also the deepest. Today, his mother had suddenly passed away and he was feeling sad and indignant. When he heard Deng Ziyu's words, he turned around and grabbed a chair and threw it at him. Deng Ziyu raised his padao and blocked the chair with a clatter. The sixth master's eyes were red, and the muscles on his face twisted. With a sharp howl, he said, "Someone beat this group of heartless dogs to death." The guards and servants of the Ming family had been waiting for these words. During this half a year, they had been oppressed by the Overwatch Council until they could barely breathe. No matter how much they tried, they could not protect themselves. Today, even the old matriarch had been forced to death. Looking at the Overwatch Council officials present, it was like looking at evil dogs that had broken into their own home. They were afraid that they would not be ruthless. Everyone let out a cry, picked up their weapons, and charged forward, giving a flurry of attacks. From the moment he learned of the old matriarch's death, Deng Ziyu knew that the matter was about to get out of hand. He had his subordinates prepare for battle. Although the battle was sudden, they were not caught unprepared. The people around them formed a small defensive circle and pulled out the padao at their waists to fight. For a moment, only the sound of wind could be heard, only the light of knives and the shadow of swords could be seen, and occasionally, a wretched cry accompanied by the terrified screams of the Ming family women. Ming Garden was very lively today. There were many people in Ming Garden, and there were indeed a few ace instructors among the private soldiers. As soon as they met face to face, many people in the Overwatch Council were injured. Fresh blood sprayed out like it was free. Although the 4th Bureau was not the most powerful yamen of the Overwatch Council, they were, after all, people who had received professional training. Although there were people injured, there were immediately people from the inner circle who took over. With great difficulty, they maintained the defensive circle and successfully repelled the first wave of the Ming family's private soldiers' attack. But how long could they last? The 6th Master was about to go crazy and yelled with all his might. A light slap rang out. The 6th Master's face was slapped. He turned his head in shock and saw his older brother's face, which was still sorrowful but mostly angry. Ming Qingda lowered his voice and gritted his teeth. "You want the entire clan to accompany you in death?" Without waiting for the stunned 6th Master to reply, Ming Qingda's face darkened and he yelled, "All of you, stop." His voice was not very loud, so many people did not hear. An excited flush appeared on Ming Qingda's pale face. He raised his voice and yelled, "Do you want to rebel?" After all, he was the nominal master of the Ming family. Particularly after the old Ming matriarch's death, the word nominal could be removed. Thus, with Ming Qingda's order, all of the Ming garden thugs stopped and retreated. The crowd opened up a path. Ming Qingda walked coldly along this path until he was in front of the people of the Overwatch Council. The master of the Ming family looked coldly at Deng Ziyu like he was looking at a vicious dog waiting to die. Deng Ziyu did not show any weakness. He smiled coldly and said, "Master Ming, you asked a good question. Are you really preparing to rebel?" Ming Qingda's gaze carried a glimmer of desolation and disdain, but he still did not say anything. How could the Ming family respond at this time? Kill the 40 Overwatch Council officials in front of them? Then, without waiting for an edict from Jingdo, Sir Fan Jr., sitting in Suzhou as well as Governor Shui, could mobilize troops at any time to destroy Ming Garden. But they had forced his mother to death. All of this doubt and painful psychological struggle appeared on Ming Qingda's face and fell into the eyes of the Ming family and Overwatch Council officials. "Big brother!" The 6th Master cried as he rushed to Ming Qingda's side. "Mother has been forced to death. We can't let these lackeys leave alive." After the people in Ming Garden gradually calmed down, they seemed to be able to understand the sadness and struggle in the old master's heart. The 6th Master was no exception. However, the love between mother and son was deep. How could he endure this? The humiliation and pain you have inflicted on the Ming family. Ming Qingda's lips trembled slightly. His face was pale. He stared into Deng Ziyu's eyes and said, "The Ming family will return it tenfold. As for today, if you kneel and kowtow to the old matriarch to ask for forgiveness, I will let you leave the garden." The 6th Master didn't quite believe his ears and anxiously said, "Big brother, we can't just let it go like this." On the contrary, it was Deng Ziyu opposite him who narrowed his eyes and thought for a moment. He then said, "Master Ming, you should know that the Overwatch Council kneels to the heavens, to the earth, and to the ruler. We will not kneel to anyone else." Ming Qingda's brows furrowed. It seemed that his spirit had been greatly damaged by the repeated attacks today. He could not stand steadily. With great difficulty, he held on to the 6th Master's shoulder, but he also stopped the 6th Master's impulsiveness. In a raspy voice, he said, "Then, let us all perish together." As he spoke, Deng Ziyu felt that Ming Qingda's gaze on him seemed to be trying to express some hidden meaning, but he could not figure it out. Ming Qingda sighed in his heart. He had not expected that the Overwatch Council would be so unyielding. In the face of such a dangerous situation, they were not even willing to make some superficial concessions. The confrontation continued. The situation could explode at any moment. There were always two clever people among the 6 masters of the Ming family. Seeing that the situation was not right and hearing their big brother's words of perishing together, they felt a glimmer of fear. As merchants, how could they have the right to perish together with the court? Throwing an egg at a rock, putting on such an appearance would not cause the rock to lose anything. Furthermore, he was not the old Ming matriarch's own flesh and blood. Why should he pay with his life? Thus, the second and third Ming masters surrounded him with impassioned and sorrowful expressions on their faces. They leaned close to Ming Qingda's ear and spoke quietly. They advised the old master to prioritize the lives of tens of thousands of people in the family and to temporarily endure. When it came time to avenge the old matriarch, they had to plan slowly. Ming Qingda had personally killed the old matriarch, so he already had a guilty conscience. The paleness on his face was not purposely faked. In such a situation, he had to act as if he had an irreconcilable enmity with the Overwatch Council and could not coexist. At this moment, with the second and third Ming masters coming out to persuade him, his heart felt slightly more at ease. He put on an expression of struggle and pain. After an indeterminable amount of time, they suddenly heard a clamor outside the garden. Immediately following it was the sound of horse hooves. Countless people and horses had charged in. Ming Qingda's heart trembled. He thought to himself that the Overwatch Council's Black Knights were clearly still in Jiangbei. It was impossible for them to have charged into the garden at this moment. Who were the newcomers? Thousands of soldiers galloped in on horseback. Long spears stood in great numbers. The military might was impressive. Immediately, they separated the Ming Garden's private soldiers from the Overwatch Council officials. For a moment, dust gradually rose, and the atmosphere was imposing. The people who came were the provincial soldiers the Jiangnan governor had sent over. Using an urgent order, they rushed quickly and finally arrived before the disaster happened. They stood between the two groups of people with swords drawn and bows drawn. The leader was a general. He already knew what had happened. With a serious expression, he said something to Ming Qingda. He had wanted to go in and pay his respects to the old Ming matriarch, but he knew that Ming Garden had not been set up yet. Furthermore, the old Ming matriarch had died too. He could only give up. Following the provincial soldiers into the garden was a member of the Qinian unit of the Overwatch Council. He moved closer to Deng Ziyu's side and told him the two sentences the commissioner had said. Deng Ziyu was startled for no reason. He thought that it would not be a problem to retreat. With thousands of provincial soldiers here, even if the Ming family wanted to act, they would not have the ability. The problem was, wouldn't this confirm the matter of the Overwatch Council hounding the old Ming matriarch to death? He didn't quite understand what Fan Xian was thinking. The best response right now was clearly to bring in the Black Knights and use this as an excuse to destroy the Ming family. However, the arrival of the provincial soldiers protected the lives of the Overwatch Council officials and prevented the possibility of the Black Knights massacring the garden. As for the cause of the old Ming matriarch's death that Deng Ziyu had long suspected, only the Suzhou government had the right to investigate. The Overwatch Council did not have this right. Furthermore, the government officials in Jiangnan were all people of the Ming family, so it was impossible for them to find any problems. Thus, he became more and more confused. How exactly did the commissioner arrange this? Were they still going to capture housekeeper Zhou? Were they going to allow this matter to continue developing like this? In the depths of spring, Suzhou was wrapped in silver. It was not snow, but it was colder than snow. Almost all of the Suzhou people wore mourning clothes. The snow-white strips of cloth were like icy imperial edicts, narrating the old Ming matriarch's benevolence and achievements toward the Jiangnan people. The news of the old Ming matriarch's death spread throughout Jiangnan in almost a night. The specific circumstances of her death were passed around from different people's mouths and became more and more bizarre. Regardless of which version of the news, the spearhead was pointed at the Overwatch Council. The anger of the people began to accumulate, but they could not find an outlet to vent it at the moment. The Overwatch Council Yamen had always been secretive, so there was temporarily no heroic scene of tens of thousands of people closing their doors to demand justice. As for the Hua Garden where the imperial envoy was, there was a heavy guard. The people did not have the courage to demonstrate for now. Thus, everyone could only wear mourning clothes and use the grief and anger on their faces and the bitter curses of the marketplace to express their silent protest. This was directed at the Overwatch Council and also at Sir Fan Jr. The old Ming matriarch's mourning hall had not yet opened, so the officials and nobles who had come from various places to offer their condolences were temporarily staying in Suzhou. All of Suzhou was enveloped in a cold atmosphere, completely different from the spring scenery around it. However, Fan Xian did not care about this. His skin was thick enough, his heart was black enough, and his spirit was strong enough to watch the scene of the city in mourning as if it were a movie from his previous life. As for the curses directed at him in the open and in the dark, he could completely ignore them. He sat on the top floor of the Suzhou branch of Xinfeng restaurant and was only worried about Haitang. That day, Haitang had gone to capture Mr. Zhou of the Juanshan conference for him and still hadn't returned. He didn't know if she was in any danger. Thinking of this, he couldn't help smiling self-mockingly. The only people in this world who could harm Duo were those great grandmasters. He picked up his bowl and slurped down a few mouthfuls of noodles. He sighed with satisfaction and then said, "Master Ming, I've been tricked badly by you this time." Ming Qingda knelt by his side and repeatedly kowtowed. In a fawning voice, he said, "Sir's thoughts are as agile as the long river, and your aura is as lofty as a mountain. How could you care about these little winds around you?" To be continued. If you want to know what happened after, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 398. Torrential River Water? The Yellow River Flooding? Rise. Now you are the true master of the Ming family. You don't have to be so careful in front of me. Fan Xian used an amused gaze to examine Ming Qingda. He then picked up the bowl of noodles and slurped it down. Ming Qingda had secretly come to Xinfeng restaurant and avoided everyone's eyes and ears. He was incomparably careful and nervous. After all, at this moment, an atmosphere of grief and indignation was accumulating in Suzhou. The tens of thousands of people in the Ming family were all looking at him, the master of the family. If people knew that he had secretly come to see the imperial envoy, he would probably not be able to continue being the clan leader. The problem was, after seeing him today, Imperial Envoy Fan Xian still refused to give a clear answer. This made Ming Qingda feel a glimmer of strangeness in his heart. Fan Xian put down the bowl and thought for a bit. "Let's not talk about anything else for now. I only want to ask you, the Mr. Zhou you promised me, where is he now?" Ming Qingda felt the coldness and coercion in the Imperial Envoy's words and unconsciously lowered his head to defend himself. "That person? I was unable to control him and let him out of the garden. This was my mistake. Please punish me." "Punish?" Fan Xian laughed self-mockingly. "Now that you've done this, how can I punish you?" Ming Qingda sighed and said, "Even now, do you still not believe in my sincerity?" Fan Xian shook his head and said, "Last time in the palace treasury courtyard, I had already said it. Hold the bowl like a dragon spitting out pearls, use chopsticks like a phoenix nodding its head, eat until you're 80% full, and if you can't finish, take it away. Being a person and doing things is the same as eating. Your posture has to be beautiful, and you have to know your limits." He stared into Ming Qingda's eyes. "In our agreement, you sold people to me and acted as a mediator, but it did not involve the contents behind. You did not report this matter to me and did it yourself. The present situation puts me in a difficult position." Ming Qingda was silent for a moment and then quietly said, "Now that things have come to this, in order to prevent the Ming family from turning into smoke and clouds in my hands, some people blocking the front must rest. I trust that you can understand. Understanding is one thing, but doing this without my permission is another. Don't think that by borrowing my subordinates to enter the garden and taking advantage of the situation, you can completely cover up this matter. You have to know that I have paid a great price in this matter. Presently, the entire Jiangnan is watching me. Think about how you will cover up this matter." Ming Qingda was speechless. A moment later he said, "This is Qingda's fault. I will think of a way." Fan Xian nodded. In truth, he didn't really trust this ruthless old fox in front of him. Ming Qingda saw the Imperial Envoy's expression relax slightly. Only then did he gather his courage and say, "Sir, there were people in Ming Garden surrounding and attacking Overwatch Council officials. This matter should be investigated." Fan Xian listened to these words and couldn't resist smiling. Not only was this old Ming master ruthless, his skin was also as thick as his own. He sighed and said, "If these words were heard by outsiders, I don't know how scared they would be. The master of the Ming family is actually urging the Overwatch Council to investigate Ming Garden." Ming Qingda smiled slightly and said, "If I don't do this, how can I make you believe in my heart?" Relax. Fan Xian calmed down. "My identity and position are different from yours. You have no way of handing Sergio to me, but I will still do what I promised you. I will handle 6th Ming, so don't worry too much. However," he stared into Ming Qingda's eyes and said forcefully, "It's still the same words as before. You tricked me this time. Now, everyone in Jiangnan wants to eat my flesh. You have to think of a way to deal with this matter. Otherwise, you know the consequences." Ming Qingda bowed sincerely and accepted the order. He then carefully asked, "What about 4th? Fan Xian was silent and did not reply to his question. Ming Qingda sighed in his heart. He knew that the imperial envoy had to leave a few more weaknesses in his hands before he could be at ease in letting him sit in the position of the master of the Ming family. As for the matter of the 4th master's prison break, the Overwatch Council had witnesses and could throw them out at any time to beat him to death. Fan Xian glanced at him with a not-quite-there smile. He thought, how could a chess piece like the 4th Ming master be taken out now? If he didn't pursue the matter of the prison break, then the 4th Ming master would be useless. If he did, then the 4th Ming master would just die. Wouldn't it be a pity to die like this? Right now, your family's emotions are still agitated. Don't worry about the matter of cleaning out the old matriarch's trusted aides, Fan Xian warned. He suddenly smiled and said, "You're better at this kind of thing than I am. My words are a bit unnecessary." Ming Qingda quickly and respectfully said, "It is all thanks to the imperial envoy's guidance along the way." "Don't say that." The corner of Fan Xian's mouth twitched and he stopped him. "The last powerful move was not something I could think of." "Also," Fan Xian said quietly. Fan Xian said in a quiet voice, "After the matter has calmed down, you can make arrangements for Xia Qifei to return to his ancestral home." Ming Qingda abruptly raised his head and looked at Fan Xian with a pair of calm eyes that carried complicated emotions. A moment later, he faintly said, "Sir, you still don't trust me." "Say less of these pompous words," Fan Xian said. "You know, and I also know. You don't trust me. Naturally, I also don't trust you. Xia Qifei is the one I truly trust. As long as he doesn't enter the Ming Garden to discuss matters, our agreement cannot be considered complete." The wrinkles on Ming Qingda's forehead appeared to deepen. He took a deep breath and said, "Qing Qing and I had disagreements when he was young. I'm afraid he hates me to the bone. Fine, according to the imperial envoy's orders, I am willing to back down. However, the old matriarch has just passed away. This is a time when emotions are running high. Everyone knows that Qing Qing is your trusted aide. For him to return to his ancestral home, I'm afraid I won't be able to suppress the backlash from the tens of thousands of people in the clan." Fan Xian shook his head and straightforwardly said, "What time is this? Everyone in Jiangnan hates me. Do you think I care about the backlash from the tens of thousands of people in your clan? This situation was created by you. Naturally, you will have to settle the backlash from the people in the clan. I only want the result. As for the process, that is something you should worry about." Ming Qingda's expression darkened slightly and he said, "This matter is truly difficult." "There is nothing difficult about it." Fan Xian looked at him mockingly. "I have always admired your methods. Since the old matriarch has already been buried, the Overwatch Council has no right to investigate anything. However, I have always sent people to keep an eye on the grave. Making things difficult for you is better than making things difficult for me. If I am truly troubled to an unbearable point, then you should be troubled for the rest of your life." The Overwatch Council already had enough information on Ming Qingda. If Ming Qingda had other thoughts, before Fan Xian's days were good, Ming Qingda would certainly be the first to be cut into pieces. Since things had progressed to this point, Ming Qingda knew that although his shrewd and ruthless plan had allowed him to sit in the position of the true master of the Ming family, he had also sat on a volcano. In particular, the last move he had hidden from the imperial envoy. Although it made it so that the Overwatch Council could no longer pressure the Ming family, it had truly angered Fan Xian. Fan Xian tore off all pretenses and began to make naked threats. Faced with this kind of naked threat, Ming Qingda knew he could only accept it completely. He had done so many treasonous things. He had not expected that in the end, it would all benefit the other party. He raised his head angrily and looked at the imperial envoy. "Sir, good plan." Fan Xian was not angry at all. He chuckled and said, "The old Ming master likes to scheme against others. Now, he thinks he has been schemed against by me. Naturally, he feels uncomfortable. However, don't think too highly of me. In this area, I truly do not have much talent." His voice became cold. "One can be strong without desires. The old Ming master has asked for too many things, so naturally, he will give me too many opportunities. As for scheming, I have always thought that such things as schemes are never as terrifying as direct power. After scheming, I have instead ruined your life, old Ming master. In the future, it is best to be more honest and do things more sincerely." Ming Qingda fell silent. "You can go back first. There are still many things I need you to deal with, such as the resentment the people in the clan have toward me that I need you to appease," Fan Xian said with a smile. "If there are any arrangements in the future, I will send someone to let you know." He thought for a bit and finally warned, "I know you are very afraid of the Juanshang conference. However, for now, don't tear off all pretenses with them. I need the Ming family to still have a position in the Juanshang conference." Ming Qingda knew there was no other way. He could only agree like this for now. He stood up and walked down the stairs. However, his back was slightly hunched, revealing his old age. After Ming Qingda left, the head of the Qinian unit of the Overwatch Council, Deng Ziyu, flashed out from behind the curtain. The shock on his face could not be hidden no matter how hard he tried. Only now did he know that the commissioner and the master of the Ming family had made so many secret agreements in private. Following Fan Xian's orders, he sat down. Deng Ziyu opened his mouth wide and stared blankly for a while before he organized his words. "Unexpected, truly unexpected." Fan Xian couldn't resist shaking his head. "What unexpected?" Ming Qingda is a clever man. He knows this is the court's intention. He does not hope to be able to oppose the court. He only hopes to use a relatively peaceful method to protect the livelihood of the tens of thousands of people in the Ming family, and on this point, he and his mother have an unbridgeable gap. Under these circumstances, if he doesn't come to find me, who can he find? Of course, I still underestimated him. Fan Xian sighed. I didn't think he would play such a game in the end. Thus, the Jiangnan people are all watching us. Xue Qing is also greatly shocked. Regardless of which way the court leans, it makes it impossible for us to continue pressuring the Ming family. On one hand, he colluded with the government to stabilize his position as the master of the Ming family. On the other hand, he secretly acted ruthlessly to stir up the emotions of the common people and protect the Ming family's temporary interests. This Ming Qingda indeed did not disappoint me. However, he didn't calculate one thing. He used me and I used him. The problem is, I have much more confidence than he does, so in the end, he can only be used by me. Everyone miscalculated one thing, Fan Xian explained seriously. Including what I said to Xue Qing, it was all to scare him. You all think I can wipe out the Ming family at any time. In reality, this is impossible. That is why I need to use Ming Qingda. Deng Ziyu looked in shock at the thoughtful commissioner. Fan Xian closed his eyes for a moment and then opened them again. Slowly he said, if the Ming family truly rebelled, what could I do? Would I really move the Black Knights into Suzhou to slaughter the garden? Yes, I could wipe out the sixth branch of the Ming family, make the blood flow like a river, and cover the fields with corpses, but what benefit does this bring me? He smiled and shook his head. After a period of cleansing, relying on the power of the court, and adding the accusation of rebellion to Ming Garden, within half a year, the entire Jiangnan would be as silent as cicadas in winter. No one would dare to say anything. The court would smoothly take over the Ming family's enormous property. Everything would go according to the emperor's plan. His face became cold. But what benefit does this bring me? Deng Ziyu was silent. The commissioner had repeated, "What benefit does it bring me?" twice and had unconsciously pitted himself against the emperor's plan. This made his heart feel cold, but he didn't dare say anything. He understood that if they truly slaughtered Ming Garden and created such a terrifying storm, although the emperor would certainly admit to framing the Ming family for rebellion, in order to appease the Jiangnan people, the Overwatch Council would certainly be severely punished, and the commissioner would not have a good time. To work for the court and take the Ming family into the national treasury, yet he had to give up his own benefits. Fan Xian would not do such a stupid thing. This is why, at the beginning, I had to find Xia Qifei, then the fourth Ming disciple, and finally Ming Qingda, Fan Xian explained in an even voice. The situation in Jiangnan appears chaotic, but it is actually very clear. Xue Qing is the emperor's trusted aide, watching from the side. I could only muddy the waters a bit more. Taking in the Ming family can only be done peacefully. Fan Xian slightly lowered his eyelids. If I do too much, the emperor could throw me out at any moment. You should understand this. Deng Ziyu felt a chill in his heart. He didn't understand why the commissioner kept referring to himself as His Majesty in front of him. He didn't understand why the commissioner would tell him such taboo matters. Was he testing him? The old Ming matriarch has always been an important figure in the Juanshan conference, Fan Xian continued. As long as she was on the throne, it was impossible for the Ming family to be taken down peacefully by me. Although her death has brought me some trouble, overall, I am willing to accept this result. Fan Xian looked into Deng Ziyu's eyes and quietly said, "You've always been by my side. Of course, you know, it has not been easy for me." Deng Ziyu sighed in his heart and bowed without saying anything. Fan Xian walked to the railing on the top floor of Xinfeng restaurant. Narrowing his eyes, he looked at the people in mourning on the street below and the incense shops working hard in the distance. He knew that all of Suzhou was busy for the old woman who had died. Countless nobles had already gathered here, waiting to go to the mourning hall to pay their respects. Deng Ziyu followed behind him and looked at the scene below. He sighed and said, "There are too many ways to deal with the Ming family. The current situation does not seem to be the best." Fan Xian calmly replied, "So, Ming Qingda's last move against me. I'll get it back in the future." In the present Jiangnan, the old Ming matriarch had mysteriously died and Ming Qingda had secretly thrown his lot in with Fan Xian. On the surface, the Ming family and Xinyang might still be able to guarantee something, but in secret, it was very different from previous years. Fan Xian held down the fort in Jiangnan. With both hands open, the palace treasury's smuggling business would be carried out with great fanfare. Without the Ming family holding him back, it would go much more smoothly. When all was said and done, the price Fan Xian paid was nothing more than the illusory word of reputation. In his view, forcing the old Ming matriarch to death had thrown the hearts of the people into chaos. The emperor would certainly find some reason to give an edict to reprimand him. He was very happy to bring shame to himself like this. In reality, there were a lot of inside information that affected Fan Xian's decision-making that he did not tell Deng Ziyu. For example, why he could not move the Black Knights and why he was afraid the emperor would throw him out. Fan Xian knew very well that in the present world, it was already an anomaly for such a young and powerful official like him to appear with such great power. Although the emperor still trusted him very much, who knew when the emperor would suddenly change his mind? Judging from the emperor's actions these years, he was a suspicious person. Thus, he had always watched him strictly to prevent him from getting involved with the military. Move the Black Knights into the province? Fan Xian smiled self-mockingly. Even if he used his butt to think, he knew how many people would be afraid once such a ruthless method was displayed. The recent disturbance in the Ministry of Revenue in the capital made Fan Xian even more clearly see that before the emperor made up his mind to eliminate the eldest princess power, he had already begun to be wary of the existence of the old Fan family. In Jingdo, the emperor did not use the matter of the Ministry of Revenue's deficit to successfully force his father to step down. Who knew if the Ming family matter would be blown up and he would take away his power? The word power appeared simple, but it was like a drug. Once consumed, it was difficult to get rid of. Although Fan Xian was clear-headed, he could not bear to reduce the power in his hands. For one, he was used to the benefits of power. For another, in order to protect himself and others, he needed the power in his hands. Taking a step back in order to advance, he would first let his reputation be damaged. Deng Ziyu followed beside him and lowered his voice. Recently, the situation has been tense. Based on the 8th Bureau's opinion, perhaps you can condescend to offer a few sticks of incense. Given Fan Xian's identity as the imperial envoy, if he went to offer sacrifices to the old Ming matriarch, it could clearly ease the present situation. However, Fan Xian only shook his head with a cold expression and said, "There's no need." Deng Ziyu was slightly startled. He didn't understand why. Fan Xian extended his hand and pointed at the grief-stricken commoners in the street. In a quiet voice, he said, "Actually, the hearts of the people are not scary. What is scary are those who stand above the people and can use the hearts of the people. As long as I can satisfy those people, what the people think will not affect the overall situation." To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 399. It began to rain again in Suzhou. It was said that the rain upstream of the Yangtze River was even heavier. The attention of the court officials was focused on the section of the river embankment above Shazhou that was riddled with holes. Even though Fan Xian was in Suzhou, his gaze could not stop from falling there. Yang Wanli had long gone to take up his post in the river transport governor's yamen. The palace treasury had transferred money, and the national treasury had also arrived. The money for the river transport had never been as plentiful as this year. However, the time to repair the river this year was too late. No one knew if it could withstand the summer floods. The rain fell heavily. The summer heat that had just arrived in Jiangnan was immediately drenched. All that was left was a cold sense of the end of spring. For the people of Jiangnan, this rain only increased the melancholy and grief in the depths of their hearts. Not many people thought of the homeless people upstream of the Yangtze River who had no houses to live in and no clothes to wear. The old Ming matriarch's funeral was about to begin. Fan Xian watched all of this coldly and had no reaction at all. After Deng Ziyu, his subordinates, including the governor's manor, the Overwatch Council, and the Palace Treasury Transport Company, all advised him that it would be best to light a stick of incense in the morning hall. The imperial envoy had expressed his stance. Given the Qin people's reverence for the court, they should not continue to make trouble. However, Fan Xian stubbornly refused this suggestion. In his opinion, it was just the funeral of an old man. What was the big deal? It was just the death of one person. If the matter upstream of the Yangtze River was not handled well, who knew how many people would die? All of the officials sighed in despair at the imperial envoy's stance. They wondered if the imperial envoy did not feel the undercurrent surging among the people. At the end of the month, the sound of mourning filled Ming Garden. White cloth hung high, and the mourning hall was spacious. It was the 7-day period for the coffin to stop. After the 7-day period, it was time to announce the funeral. According to the funeral rules of Qin Kingdom, after 7 days, the news of the funeral had to be spread to friends, family, and even enemies. Regardless of what enmity there was between the two parties in life, the rule of announcing the funeral could not be avoided. The original intention of this ceremony was to erase all enmity with death. Often, enemies in life would use the news of the funeral to personally go to the mourning hall to offer their condolences. It was the same as ending the wrongs in life. From then on, they would be separated by yin and yang and have nothing to do with each other. The high officials and nobles who had been waiting in Suzhou for the Ming Garden's funeral all received the white invitation from the Ming Garden. One by one, they tidied up their clothing and expressions and headed for the Ming Garden. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Hua Garden because, according to the rules and the old Ming matriarch's identity and position, the white card announcing the death should also be sent to Hua Garden and into the hands of the imperial envoy. As for what the imperial envoy planned to do, It all depended on how he dealt with this white invitation. No one expected that when Ming Garden delivered the white invitation to Hua Garden only politely welcomed the third Ming master in, drank a cup of tea, and then sent the third Ming master out. The white invitation was not accepted. The third Ming master immediately flew into a rage outside Hua Garden. He cursed angrily with obscenities and then spat viciously on the stone steps in front of Hua Garden. Immediately, a servant came out and used water to wash away the phlegm. Everything in the world couldn't be raised above the word reason, and in the hearts of ordinary people, the dead were the most important. This was the universal reason. The imperial envoy did not give the dead any face. It made all the people feel a glimmer of shock and anger. What surprised and angered everyone even more was that before the old Ming matriarch's mourning hall opened, the Overwatch Council acted again and captured the sixth master, who had led the resistance against the search in Ming Garden. They used the name of investigating Dongi spies. Thus, not only the Suzhou government, but even the governor's manor could not say much. After the Overwatch Council secretly captured the sixth master, they immediately sent him to the custody of the Shazhou Navy and did not hand him over to the local authorities. No one knew if there was anyone taking the lead, but from the second day onwards, there was an endless stream of people gathering in front of Hua Garden. They cursed loudly and shouted incomprehensible slogans, such as severely punishing the true culprit and releasing the innocent. What was even more headache-inducing was that the Jiangnan students and scholars had also joined in. Young students were hot-blooded. Furthermore, Sir Fan Jr.'s recent actions made these students feel disillusioned with their idols. They were furious and clamored loudly and bitterly. Hua Garden was as calm as usual. However, the Jiangnan Road Governor's Yamen was afraid of a popular revolt and moved a group of soldiers to stand guard in front of Hua Garden, chasing the agitated and angry scholars to the end of Chang Street. That afternoon, under heavy guard, Governor Xue Qing passed through the agitated crowd with great difficulty and entered Hua Garden. In the study, he and Fan Xian argued for a long time. In the end, no one could convince the other. In the end, Xue Qing helplessly asked, "If we incite the people to surround the garden and not leave, where will the court's face go?" Fan Xian coldly said, "Surrounding the prince with evil intentions. If you still don't move your troops, I will." Xue Qing was startled. Only now did he remember that there was still a third prince living in Ming Garden. If he allowed the people of Suzhou to surround Hua Garden and the news got back to Jingdou, he wouldn't be able to be the governor anymore. The leading scholars would probably have to pay with their lives. As the Jiangnan governor, he did not dare to allow such a terrifying thing to happen within his jurisdiction. After thinking for a moment, he sincerely asked, "What should we do?" Given Governor Xue Qing's shrewdness and experience, taking care of a few hot-blooded scholars was a small problem. Most importantly, he understood that this was clearly an atmosphere Fan Xian had purposely created. Without knowing what Fan Xian's true intentions were, there was no need for him to forcefully interfere and sink himself into this mess. Fan Xian glanced at him and said, "They are all hot-blooded young people. I don't want to make things difficult for them. However, this continuous rain will make it cold at night. Their hot-blooded hearts will also go cold, so naturally, they will disperse." Xue Qing's brows furrowed slightly. "And if they don't disperse?" Fan Xian smiled coldly. "Righteous indignation cannot be eaten. If they don't disperse at night, then it means that some of the people surrounding the garden are not acting out of righteous indignation but have other goals. The goal those people hiding in the dark wanted to achieve was simple. They didn't need to incite a civil revolt. They just needed to make the people's reactions bigger and have the matter travel back to Jingdou. The emperor would have to respond. Xue Qing thought for a moment and immediately understood Fan Xian's meaning. He said, "Should the governor's manor take action in this matter?" Fan Xian shook his head. "This is a matter of bad reputation. I'll take responsibility for it myself. Sir, just look after Hua Garden. After all, the third prince's safety is of the utmost importance." Xue Qing understood. He couldn't help but feel a glimmer of strangeness and shock in his heart. According to the common sense of officialdom, the matter of suppressing a civil revolt had to be done together by everyone above. However, Fan Xian's solitary and stubborn appearance did indeed reduce the pressure on him. After the discussion ended, Xue Qing took his leave. Fan Xian sat alone in the study in a daze. Shortly after, he couldn't resist smiling self-mockingly. Haitang had been gone for many days and still hadn't returned. If he couldn't capture Sir Zhou, then the Ming Garden coup would mean he had lost 1/3 of the benefits. As for the angry Suzhou people, Fan Xian didn't care at all. With Ming Qingda leading, the matter would certainly not go beyond the critical line of intensification. The problem was, it was clear that behind this mass movement, there were many shadows of people hiding in the dark. Without anyone instigating, how could the cowardly citizens of the Qing court have the courage to come to the imperial envoy's manor and raise their voices? Concerning this matter, Fan Xian had already made ample preparations. Now that he had Xue Qing's reply, his heart was even more at peace. The matter was indeed as Fan Xian had expected. When the sky darkened, the crowd outside had gradually dispersed. There were only the students with square headscarves on their heads, their faces full of righteousness, and a few unknown citizens mixed together. With the governor's manor's military watching, these people could only stand at the end of Chang Street and chant, angrily accusing the imperial envoy of treating human life like grass and harming the Jiangnan people. No one knew who started it, but the crowd gradually became excited and pressed toward Hua Garden. For a moment, the governor's manor soldiers did not dare to act ruthlessly and slowly retreated. As they got closer and closer to Hua Garden, the crowd stopped. There was a clamor of voices, and all kinds of ugly curses were thrown out. However, the students were not all idiots. They knew that cursing was one thing, but they were all cursing about the Overwatch Council and did not touch upon Fan Xian's 18 generations of ancestors. Everyone under heaven knew that Fan Xian's ancestors were the Emperor's ancestors. Cursing the Overwatch Council that all scholars hated to the bone was fine, but cursing the Emperor's 18 generations of ancestors? Everyone just wanted to vent the anger of the old Ming matriarch, who had died an unjust death. They didn't want to throw their lives into it. Hua Garden was still silent. One could faintly see the flickering lights inside, and the sound of stringed instruments came through the rain. The soldiers of the governor's manor were on standby. They lit torches in their hands and lit up the outside of Hua Garden. The rain was like a thread and had long soaked the bodies of the students still outside Hua Garden. They looked at each other and wiped the rain off their faces, not daring to believe their own ears. Suzhou was already like this, they were already like this, yet the imperial envoy still had the leisure to do this, like this. They were drenched in the rain, yet the imperial envoy was listening to a play. The students strangely became angry. The angry cursing that had just stopped due to exhaustion rang out again. Amidst the angry cursing, a person wearing a gray unlined garment was sandwiched in the crowd. His eyes rolled around a few times. He took out something from his clothes and threw it into Hua Garden. The item fell into the garden and only made a muffled sound. There was no sound of an explosion. Instead, a thunderous curse came from Hua Garden. Who the F***ck is throwing a bag of dog blood? Throwing dog blood was one of the most insulting tricks. Although it was childish like a child throwing a tantrum, throwing it into the imperial envoy's Hua Garden was a big deal. The students were also stunned, and the cursing stopped for a moment. They thought to themselves, which classmate is this? How could he be so daring? Just as they were thinking this, 3 black shadows flashed across Hua Garden. It was 3 swordsmen of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council. They watched the troublemakers on the street outside the garden coldly. The crowd fell silent for a moment. Suddenly, someone exploded with a cry, "The Overwatch Council is going to kill people." A shadow charged into the crowd. The sound of fanning the flames suddenly stopped. It was like someone had grabbed the throat of a duck's fate. The crowd was startled and parted in the middle. A large man wearing cotton clothing walked out coldly with a gray-clothed person's throat in his hand. The large man wearing cotton clothing was the leader of the Tiger Guards, Gouda. He had been watching the people fanning the flames on Fan Xian's orders. Given his ability, it was easy for him to take the person. He threw the gray-clothed man to the ground and stepped on his chest. The sound of the man's sternum breaking could be heard. The students looked at this wretched scene. Hot blood rushed to their heads. They surrounded Gouda in the middle and yelled, "Murder! The Overwatch Council is killing people." This scene scared the surrounding officials of the governor's manor. They urged their horses forward, ready to send troops to suppress the situation at any moment. Gouda coldly picked up the gray-clothed man and shook him like he was shaking a sack. Clink, clink, clink. Who knew how many things fell from the man's body? First, he didn't die. The gray-clothed man's moan answered Gouda's words. The student's emotions calmed slightly. Gouda coldly said, "Second, you are here to seek justice. This person is here to tempt the imperial envoy to kill you. There is a difference, so there is a difference in treatment." These are his original words. Only now did the students come to their senses. Looking down, they couldn't help but jump in fright. They saw that there were not only bags of dog blood on the gray-clothed man's body. There were also fire seeds and lamp oil. Only now did everyone understand that if they allowed this person to do bad things in the crowd and actually burn down Hua Garden, where the prince and imperial envoy lived, they would certainly be killed on the spot by the court as thugs. His original words are too, Gouda said coldly. Everyone was intimidated by his imposing manner and listened obediently. If there is injustice in your chest, you have to vent it. This is the nature of young people. I don't blame you. Gouda continued to narrate Fan Xian's words. But to be incited by someone and not know the truth, how stupid is that? If there is injustice you want to vent, you have to find the right way. To make such a racket like a shrew in the marketplace is truly shameful. Listening to these words, the students felt very dissatisfied. A student who seemed to be the leader stood out boldly. The Overwatch Council handles matters unfairly, forcing people to die. I once went to the Suzhou government to make a report, but officials protect each other. Furthermore, the Suzhou government fears the power of the Overwatch Council and does not accept the complaint. Dare I ask the imperial envoy, what other way can I vent my anger? Gouda glanced at that person coldly. Sir, since you have the courage to gather outside the garden to make trouble, do you have the courage to enter the garden to discuss matters? The students immediately began to make a ruckus. Some said they couldn't enter, others said they had to enter. There were many different opinions. In the end, they all focused their gazes on the student who had stood out earlier. This student was a student of Jiangnan Road's White Deer Academy. His name was Fong Tingsher. He came from a poor background but was very knowledgeable. He had always been deeply admired by his peers and was the hidden leader of the students. Fong Tingsher thought for a moment and gritted his teeth. From his clothes, he took out the letters of blood from tens of thousands of people he had collected. Raising them above his head, he said, "I am willing to enter the garden to debate with you." Gouda glanced at him expressionlessly. Carrying the gray-clothed man, he walked into the garden. Fong Tingsher felt slightly uneasy. Summoning up his courage, he walked in. At the same time, he dissuaded his fellow students' requests to enter together. Fan Xian sat in the grand wooden armchair with his eyes half closed, enjoying Cici's gentle massage behind him. His fingers tapped on the table along with the singing of the melodious master in the pavilion in the garden. Below him, the incomparably daring Fong Tingsher, who had entered the garden alone to ask for justice from the imperial envoy, was flipping through something. His face alternated between green and white. His lips trembled slightly. It was as if he was shocked by what was recorded on it. Fan Xian slowly opened his eyes and said, "This is a court secret. However, there are many things that are not convenient to bring to the Suzhou government as evidence. There are many things that are already dead and cannot be used as evidence. There are many things that involve nobles in court. I cannot use them as a cover to openly destroy the Ming Garden. However, since you have the courage to pull together a group of students to seek justice, presumably you are not an idiot. After seeing so many things, you should have your own independent judgment as to what exactly happened in the Ming Garden matter." What Fong Tingsher held in his hands were the results of the Overwatch Council's secret investigation of the Ming Garden this half-year. It included the pirates on the East Sea Island, the strange death of Ming Launcher's concubine, the story of Xia Qifei and the Ming family smuggling to Dongyi, and the ace Sigujien left to enter Jiangnan to assassinate Fan Xian. Each stroke was recorded clearly. Although, as Fan Xian had said, these records could not be presented as evidence because of the lack of circumstantial evidence, Fang Tingshi knew that what was written on it was all true. His hands holding the files were trembling. But it shouldn't be like this. The old Ming matriarch has softened Jiangnan and supported countless poor students. My family has been poor since I was young. If it wasn't for the Ming Garden giving me rice every month to study, how could I have entered White Deer Academy? His eyes were slightly red. He stared angrily at Fan Xian and said, "Imperial envoy, since I dared to enter the garden today, I did not have any thoughts of leaving alive. I do not believe the things recorded here. The Overwatch Council is best at framing people." Fan Xian looked at him coldly and did not continue. Fang Tingshi himself could not continue. Ever since I took over the Overwatch Council, when has there been a case of framing people and framing people? Fan Xian said mockingly. As for you, as a student, you should have the ability to make independent judgments. You don't need to rely on other people's words or your own eyes. You only need to look at the situation these years and your own brain. Of course, you all have no brains to begin with, Fan Xian scolded. If you all had brains, you wouldn't have been persuaded by others to come to Hua Garden. Where is this? This is the Imperial Envoy's residence. This is the Prince's temporary Imperial residence. Even if I cut off 300 of your heads, there would be no problem. In the end, it will be you all who die, and my reputation will also be gone. It will be good for those shady and illegal merchants who bend the law. He was angry and unkind. Pointing at Fang Tingshi's nose, he scolded, "You are all a bunch of idiots. I don't know where all your years of studying went." His anger was faked because Fan Xian knew that these students would fall for it the most. As expected, Fang Tingshi mumbled, "The Imperial Envoy's teaching is correct." He changed his mind. Not only had the Imperial Envoy not taken action to suppress the students, but he had also invited him into the manor. His heart was indeed sincere. He opened his mouth with a pained smile and said, "Sir is magnanimous." Fan Xian closed his eyes and shook his head. "My magnanimity cannot be said to be magnanimous. It is just that you are all still young. I am not willing to use those methods, as to why I can tolerate you today." He suddenly opened his eyes and said, "You should know who the 4 disciples of Fan Xian's are." Fan Xian's 4 disciples, Hou Jichang, Qing Jialin, Shi Chanli, and Yang Wanli, were all Fan Xian students who had jumped up after the spring examination case. Fang Tingshi nodded. Fan Xian smiled. "My 4 students are all older than me, but they all call me teacher. Back in the day, Jichang had also caused trouble in Jiangnan, just like you are today." Fang Tingshi was slightly startled. Fan Xian finally said, "It is not that I value talent. Perhaps I am nostalgic looking at you." After Fang Tingshi left, Cici furrowed her brows and said, "Young master, these people don't know what's good for them. Why are you still so polite?" Fan Xian shook his head. "Reputation is indeed not important, but I still have to be careful about the students. In the future, after these people pass the provincial examinations, they will all enter the court as officials. Even if I don't think for myself, I still have to think for the prince." Cici then said, "Then let this matter end here." A warm smile rose to the corners of Fan Xian's lips. If Fang Tingshi can persuade the students to go back, it means he has the ability. In the future, of course, we have to train him well. As for the ghosts mixed in the crowd, they are the ones I am waiting for. Ming Qingda had long sent someone to send a message. The internal structure of Ming Garden had pretty much been suppressed. The problem was, it was not easy to suppress the rumors in Suzhou at the moment, particularly the troublemaking crowd. There were certainly people with ulterior motives. "Don't use knives." Fan Xian turned around and gave orders to Gauda. "The wooden sticks I had you prepare a few days ago are more useful. As for suppressing things, you have to hit them painfully, but you can't let them bleed." No matter what matter it was, adding the word bleed in front of it was always troublesome. After Fong Tincture left the garden, he gathered with the students and spoke for a long time. Unfortunately, he was unable to convince everyone. On the contrary, some of the students suspected that he was afraid of the power of the court. There were also some sarcastic words in the crowd that provoked him. After Fong Tingxi's anger, he was ashamed. For a moment he didn't know what to do. He could only take his friends and leave Ming Garden first. Only half of the people who had surrounded Ming Garden to express their anger remained. The officials of the governor's manor watched even more closely after the dog blood bag incident earlier. After an indeterminable amount of time, a large group of people suddenly charged out of Hua Garden with wooden sticks in their hands. They struck down on the bodies of the students who had surrounded and refused to leave. For a moment, wretched cries rang out and the sound of sticks hitting flesh rang out. Although the people of the Overwatch Council did not strike too heavily and the students were not heavily injured, the students, who had immersed themselves in scriptures every day, had never experienced this kind of stick education. They cried and yelled before they were chased away by the sticks. In front of Hua Garden, peace immediately returned. Only the rain slowly floated down. The commander of the governor's manor stared dumbstruck at this scene. He thought to himself that the imperial envoy was truly vicious and merciless. No one noticed that, following the scattered students, there were also some furtive figures. Behind these figures, there were also secret agents of the Overwatch Council disguised as scholars or commoners. As they ran in panic, they kept a careful eye on them. Fan Xian stepped on the ladder and held the third prince's hand as they climbed to the top of Hua Garden's wall. Looking at this scene, he couldn't resist laughing and said, "According to the standard pattern, today we should have some gang members disguised as people with lofty ideals who are loyal to the emperor and love the people to beat up these students." The third prince asked curiously, "Sir, why didn't you do this today?" Fan Xian laughingly scolded, "You want to use the Jiangnan water bandits? Now everyone knows that Xia Qifei is one of us. What need is there for that extra face? I'm still sick. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 400. So high-spirited. Fan Xian had one foot on the railing of the top floor of the Suzhou branch of Baoyue brothel. He held a fan in his other hand and fanned himself. The cold rain at the end of spring had stopped. The summer heat had gone and returned. In an instant, the temperature in the air rose. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the funeral procession passing through the main street. He listened to the babbling of mourning music and couldn't resist smiling. Ming Qingda indeed had a way. On the surface, he appeared mournful, angry, and absolutely irreconcilable with Fan Xian. He had actually allowed the old Ming matriarch's burial ceremony to pass through the city. It was very ostentatious along the way. Along the way, there were citizens who had set up small tables and placed fruits in worship. There were also some beggars who had received benefits who were kowtowing to the slowly moving coffin. The sound of mourning music was actually sometimes pleasant to listen to, at least in Fan Xian's ears. He waved his fan and couldn't resist sighing again, so high-spirited. The wind blew through the fan. He couldn't be bothered to fight with Ming Garden over their pride. He did not find it exciting to use a dead person to obstruct his eyes. If they wanted to parade, then go ahead. In any case, it wouldn't do him any real harm. After sweeping away the sixth Ming disciple and the old matriarch's trusted aides, Ming Qingda had already gradually and steadily controlled the situation in Ming Garden. It was also under his powerful suppression that the tens of thousands of Ming family members did not let out a final roar of mutual destruction because of the old Ming matriarch's unusual death. The scholars who had been clamoring in Suzhou a few days ago had been split apart by Fan Xian and then educated with a rod. Without the support of the Ming family, their momentum immediately weakened. Just as Fan Xian had expected, the so-called righteous indignation could not last long. Of course, Fan Xian knew that if he wanted to suppress the voices of revenge within the Ming family, it would certainly be hard on Ming Qingda. However, this matter had been caused by Ming Qingda. If he didn't want Fan Xian to fly into a rage, he had to swallow all this hard work, difficulty, and anger. What truly made Fan Xian happy was that the crows scattered among the crowd a few days ago had already sent back news. He didn't know if it was because of the Ming family's sudden silence that the elders of the Juanshang conference had no time to react. At least in the Jiangnan area, some of the officials of the Juanshang conference had made some rather stupid responses, such as inciting the citizens to cause trouble. Relying on the Overwatch Council's secret investigation in this matter and the people Ming Qingda had secretly sold to Hua Garden, the Overwatch Council had already set their sights on a manor downstream of the Yangtze River. It was a stronghold the Juanshang conference had set up in Jiangnan. Perhaps it was just an unremarkable manor and was not very important to the Juanshang conference, but Fan Xian needed to get rid of it to express his stance. While he was in Jiangnan, your Juanshang conference had better behave for the time being. If you don't behave, I'll shut you up. The Black Knights could not enter Ming Garden because the Emperor did not like to see the Overwatch Council's martial power overly involved in local government affairs. However, for such a mysterious organization as the Juanshang Conference that even faintly resisted imperial power, the Qing Emperor probably did not care what methods Fan Xian used. Governor Xueqing of Jiangnan Road also did not oppose Fan Xian's plan. After all, there was not enough time to ask Jingdo. Today was the day the old Ming matriarch was being buried. It was also the day the 500 Black Knights stealthily crossed the Yangtze River to wash a certain place in blood. The funeral procession had already passed through the long street under the Baoyue brothel. Fan Xian noticed that a few nobles had already carefully backed out of the procession. These Jiangnan people did not want to offend the Ming family, but they also did not want to give the imperial envoy too much face. Thus, they sent the procession to the city gates and turned back on their own. So high-spirited and vigorous, with great power in hand, what need was there to fear the hearts of the people? Although Fan Xian did not get carried away, he had begun to feel in the depths of his heart that power was truly like a drug. No wonder Shizha had a saying, Xiaolong had paraphrased it, and it was commonly seen on the forums. Absolute so-and-so brought absolute so-so. However, Fan Xian knew that he did not need to be corrupt. He thought without shame that his mental realm was still relatively high, so he couldn't resist sighing for the third time. In the story, there should be someone asking, Sir, why? It was a pity that Wang Qinian still had another half a year before he could return to the Qin kingdom. Beside him, Deng Ziyu deliberated for a long time with a strange expression before choking out, Sir, seems to be in a good mood. Fan Xian smiled and spat. Of course I'm in a good mood. This old woman died cleanly. Standing on a tall building and watching others enter the grave, how could I not be happy? Deng Ziyu thought to himself, what was there to be happy about? He couldn't resist opening his mouth to admonish, Jiangnan people? He only said 3 words before Fan Xian stopped him and smiled coldly. Don't repeat those words. What people's hearts and public opinion? In a few months, these people will completely forget. What benevolence, what benefits, they can only remember for a few days. In the end, it cannot compare to the fact that there is no oil to cook at home, no rice to cook at home. These things are important. Common people are the most forgetful people in the world. His words had a point, and it was pointing to Fan Xian's past, the Yi family that had long been weathered by wind and rain and turned into the palace treasury of the royal court. Back then, compared to the Ming family of today, the Yi family was 10 times more glorious, 10 times more powerful, and 10 times more benevolent toward the people. Heaven changed its face in one day, and the family was broken and people died. The tens of thousands of people under heaven all kept quiet out of fear. Who dared to seek justice for the Yi family? Deng Ziyu was startled and silent. He knew he had touched on the commissioner's years of pain, so he didn't say anything more. He finally understood why the commissioner would always smile coldly and not care about the people's hearts each time he mentioned them. As officials, we are only the emperor's officials, not the people's officials. Fan Xian's words were the complete opposite of serving the people. With the situation having reached this point, what was there for Fan Xian to be dissatisfied with? The Ming family was the monkey in the palm of his hand. Jiangnan was certain. Xia Qifei had already sent back news from Jiangbei. A few days ago, he had hooked up with his second brother's side. The storm in the Ministry of Revenue in the capital had settled. There was an urgent need to gather herbs in Hangzhou. The 3 large workshops in the palace treasury were in full swing. Under the gaze of the Qingyu Hall shopkeeper, they were serious and lively. As for officialdom, Fan Xian's relationship with Xue Qing was growing closer and closer. In the palace, the emperor's trust in him had not decreased. Particularly after the Ming family matter, Fan Xian had damaged his own reputation. Without question, it increased the emperor's pity for his illegitimate child who was willing to be alone. Looking left and right, it was all a situation of great victory for him. As for the Juanshang conference, a cold smile flashed across the corner of Fan Xian's lips. He didn't know what the old cripple in Qin Garden outside the capital was thinking. In any case, Fan Xian did not plan on delving too deeply into this matter. The so-called raising a tiger was like this. To completely wipe out the Juanshang conference, first of all, this was a very difficult task. Even if Fan Xian went wild and risked losing most of the power in his hands, he still might not be able to accomplish this. Just looking at how the incomparably powerful second priest of the Qing Temple, Great Master Sanshi, was only a pawn thrown out by the Juanshang conference, one could imagine how much terrifying power was hidden in this nominally loose organization. Even if, with the help of his father and the old cripple, the whole family put their lives on the line and successfully overturned the Juanshang conference, Jiangnan would be settled, and the monarch's power was stable. The emperor would not allow Fan Xian to lead troops into battle. Then what else could Fan Xian do? At such a young age, would he stay in that dark and gloomy room in the Overwatch Council and retire? Fan Xian did not want to become a second Shen Pingping, so he would not rush to resolve and extinguish certain conflicts. On the contrary, he hoped that these conflicts would slowly blossom in a situation he could control, like a poisonous flower. Of course, he did not think that today, in the Baoyu brothel, his thoughts and the old cripple's thoughts were actually the same. The old and the young were both working hard in secret for a goal that could not be announced. The only regret was that these two people did not seem to be willing to communicate with each other. Perhaps they did not want to implicate each other? Not delving into the Juanshang conference did not mean they wouldn't deal with it. The Juanshang conference had tricked Fan Xian a few times in Jiangnan. He had to settle this debt. At this moment, the Black Knights were advancing silently on the mountain path. After a few months of planning, the only small hole was the Juanshang conference accountant, Mr. Zhou. This person had not been silenced. Furthermore, under the surveillance of both Ming Qingda and himself, he was still able to escape without a sound. This meant that this person was certainly an important character in the Juanshang conference. Perhaps he knew the true inside story of the Juanshang conference. However, Haitang still had not returned. A faint worry rose between Fan Xian's brows. Mr. Zhou must be under the protection of a very powerful figure. He left the railing and sat back down at the table. He ordered Deng Ziyu, contact the governor's manor and send out a wanted poster. His voice was very low. The Ming family has already sent someone to deliver housekeeper Zhou's portrait. Give it to the governor's manor and have both sides investigate together. Deng Ziyu shivered. He knew that Sir Zhou did not have any good ideas, so he could only begin to use the power of the government to try and force them in the open. As for that portrait, he knew that it was drawn by the old Ming matriarch's personal serving girl. Fan Xian sighed and said, "If we can capture that Mr. Zhou alive, don't you think this matter would be a bit too wonderful? It is indeed a wonderful thought." The top floor of Baoyue brothel was empty. Only Fan Xian's table had people sitting at it. At this moment, on the other side of the railing at that table, 2 more people suddenly appeared. Furthermore, they followed up Fan Xian's words with extreme coldness. Countless sounds of metal being unsheathed rang out in the top floor. It was very severe. With Gao Da in the lead, the 7 tiger guards gripped their strangely shaped long knives tightly in their hands and formed the shape of a mountain, firmly protecting Fan Xian behind them. At the same time, a dozen swordsmen of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council surged out from the side of the building. Their long swords had not been drawn. In their hands, They had already raised crossbows painted black and did not reflect much light. They were extremely sinister and aimed at the two people at the table. There was originally no one in the building, yet two people had appeared without a sound. Their arrival had not only been hidden from the swordsmen of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council, but also from the Tiger Guards and Fan Xian, whose internal injuries had long healed. What kind of realm was this? However, Fan Xian's defensive power reacted quickly. In an instant, he had separated the two people. A dozen crossbows, in addition to the 7 Tiger Guards who could fight head-on against Haitang Duo, and Fan Xian, who had long advanced to the 9th level, even if the newcomers were Yun Jilan of Dongyi or Sir Lang Tiao of Northern Qi, everyone had the confidence that they could easily take them down. However, the two people did not have any strange expressions in the face of such a situation. The smile on one of their faces was still a bit forced. The other figure wearing a straw had only exuded a coldness from head to toe. It was a coldness that saw everyone as nothing. The person wearing the straw hat slowly raised his head and revealed a strange face. There was not a trace of expression on his face. However, his eyes looked at the people in the building as coldly as if he was looking at a group of dead people. "You want Mr. Zhou? This is Mr. Zhou." Surrounded by crossbows, the person was as at ease as a spring breeze. A natural domineering aura rose from the air. Separated by everyone, he looked coldly at Fan Xian. "But I won't give it to you." Fan Xian looked at the person through the clothes of the Tiger Guards. His heart jumped. Calmly, he said, "So, it is you who is protecting Mr. Zhou. No wonder Haitang has never succeeded. Since you are not willing to give him to me, then why have you come to see me? I don't have the habit of chatting with uninvited guests." The person coldly said, "A deal. Pull back the Black Knights and I will spare your life." Spare your life? Under such circumstances, he was saying he would spare Fan Xian's life? Unless he was an idiot, only then would he have such confidence. However, Fan Xian knew that the other person was not an idiot, so he had to have the ability to kill him under such circumstances. Fan Xian instead smiled and asked, "How is Haitang?" The person suddenly rolled his eyes strangely. "I rarely kill women." Fan Xian smiled slightly and said, "That's good, release." Very abruptly and without warning, the word "release" was spoken. The swordsmen of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council loosened the springs in their hands. The 30 poison crossbow bolts split into 3 batches and shot toward the table like a dense rain of death. "What, Mr. Zhou? What Juanshang conference?" He didn't have time to worry about it. As long as he could kill the person in front of him, Fan Xian felt that anything was worth it. High-spirited? A bitter smile appeared at the corner of his lips. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 401. Separated by less than 10 feet, the speed of the 30 poisoned crossbow bolts was terrifying. The power attached to them was also shocking. No one could imagine that someone could dodge such a concentrated and sudden attack. Even if the person sitting at the table was a god, he would not be able to dodge. Thus, he did not dodge at all. Without seeing how he moved, a pair of chopsticks disappeared from the bamboo container on the table. He caught this pair of chopsticks firmly in his hands and then waved them freely in the air. It was as if he was catching a few delicacies from nothingness to eat. The tips of the weak bamboo chopsticks whistled through the air. It was as if it was not a pair of chopsticks but an ancient divine weapon imbued with endless jinchi. Ding 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 ding, ding, it was like rain hitting a banana leaf. A series of densely packed sounds rang out. All of the crossbow bolts in the process of quickly shooting were gently pinched and pulled by the pair of chopsticks. In an impossible situation, all of them were pulled off by a few strands. They deviated from the imagined shooting trajectory by a few strands. They brushed past the bodies of the two people by the table and shot into the wooden boards of the Baoyue brothel, into the walls of the carriage. The crossbow bolts shot into the wood. Only the tails of the bolts trembled slightly. In an instant, the 30 crossbow bolts made it seem as if wild grass had grown on the floor, but they could not harm the person at all. The swordsmen of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council looked at the scene in front of them and felt a chill surge into their hearts and take over their entire bodies. To be able to use only a pair of chopsticks to pull out such a fast crossbow bolt at such a short distance, this kind of speed, this kind of vision, this kind of power, the other party was not human. The other party was certainly not human. The Overwatch Council was the strongest organization in the Qin court. The officials of the Overwatch Council were the most determined people in the Qin kingdom. But in the end, they were still human. When they discovered that the enemy they faced seemed to have left the realm of human, they still felt fear and a kind of helplessness. The crossbow bolts of the 3rd Bureau only fired 3 times in a row. It was already too late to reload. Furthermore, the hands of all the swordsmen of the 6th Bureau were trembling. They looked incredulously at the table and the person beside it. It was as if they had forgotten their next step. As the group of crossbow bolts flew over, the 7 tiger guards were like 7 fierce tigers coming down the mountain. Under the cover of the crossbow bolts, they held long knives in their hands and turned into 7 streaks of snow-white light as they chopped toward the table. The light of the knife was still in the air when Fan Xian, who was behind the tiger guards, shouted, "Retreat!" With this shout, he stood up and leaped into the air. With the order to retreat, the other 6 tiger guards, with the exception of Gauda, forcefully reversed their jinchi. In the air, they held their sabers horizontally across their chests in an extremely awkward manner. 4 feet above the table, they forcefully steadied their bodies. With the tip of their toes, they retreated as ordered. Gauda's kung fu was the strongest, and his reaction was the fastest. As the sharp edge of the mountain, he had already reached the table. Facing the mysterious person wearing the bamboo hat, he felt a slight chill in his heart, but he could no longer retreat. He could only let out a roar and circulate the jinchi in his body to its peak. He crossed his hands and slashed down with his saber. Gauda suddenly felt something tighten around his ankle, and his body was being pulled back by a vast amount of jinchi. However, the saber had already slashed down. The light of the knife sliced across the table. Because it was being dragged by the person behind him, it didn't cut the man in the bamboo hat. Instead, it cut the floor in front of the table. With a sharp sound, the thick solid wood floor was like thin paper. A large hole was cut open by the long knife in Gauda's hand. Dust rose slightly and wood splinters flew everywhere. Through the hole, one could see the table on the 2nd floor of the Baoyue brothel. Just as Gauda struck, the man in the bamboo hat gently placed the pair of chopsticks in his hands on the table. It was only then that everyone noticed there was a sword beside the leg of the table. It was a very plain sword that did not give off a sharp light. It was wrapped in a thick coarse cloth. Then, the pair of chopsticks landed on the table. The ordinary sword suddenly gave off a bright light. With a clang, the hilt of the sword trembled without any wind. It jumped up excitedly and tore through the coarse cloth binding the scabbard. It forcefully pulled out half of the snow-white blade. A cold, murderous sword intent that did not seem to belong to the mortal world seeped out through that half of the sword. The sword intent entered the floorboards. The moment Gauda's long knife touched the floorboards, it passed over. At the same time the long knife broke open the large hole in the floorboards, countless fine lines appeared along the knife's opening and quickly spread through it. There was no pattern to the lines, but they appeared so beautiful. There was not a shred of vitality in them. The patterns quickly invaded Gauda's long saber. The tiger guard's long saber began to tremble uncontrollably. It was as though a pair of invisible hands were holding a diamond and carving it on the sharp and solid surface of the saber. Countless deep marks appeared on the surface of the saber. Gauda's hands also began to tremble. Shocked and helpless, he pulled back his knife. The long knife blade split open like a weathered stone surface. The terrifying sword intent only reached the hilt of the knife, but the ripple went up. Gauda gave a muffled grunt. His chest felt heavy and he spat out a mouthful of blood. At the same time, there was a crack sound in his right wrist. The joint had been broken. It was only a matter of 3 breaths. For the man in the bamboo hat, the crossbow bolts and 7 tiger guard knives were as simple as raising and putting down a pair of chopsticks. The moment they met, the Overwatch Council suffered a crushing defeat. At this moment, the people protecting Fan Xian knew that what he had said earlier was not empty words. Given this extraordinary and divine realm, if the man in the bamboo hat wanted to kill the imperial envoy, even if they all died, they would not be able to stop him. Extraordinary and divine. Other than the 4 great grandmasters, who else in the world had such a realm? Blood seeped out of the corner of Gao Da's mouth. His eyes were filled with shock. Half kneeling on the ground, he stared at the man in the bamboo hat not far away and said each word clearly, Sigu Jian. As an internal servant of the Qin court, when had the Tiger Guards ever feared anyone? Gao Da's 3 words were said so weakly and hopelessly. In the hearts of the people, the 4 great grandmasters were no longer in the category of normal humans. All of the legends had almost become fairy tales. The feelings people had toward the 4 great grandmasters were only respect. Respect and fear. Other than that, there was nothing else. No one dared to attack the 4 great grandmasters. Even if it was someone who wanted to commit suicide, no one would choose this path. Gao Da stared at the man in the bamboo hat with wide eyes. He didn't understand why Sigu Jian, who should be far away in Dongyi, would come to Jiangnan. It was only then that he felt his ankle being gently released. Earlier, if that person had not used a powerful force to grab his ankle and pull him back, Gao Da's knife would have chopped down and the man in the bamboo hat's sword intent rippled out. At this moment, what would have been shredded like cloth would not only be the long knife but also his body. Only now did Gao Da feel a boundless fear. Unconsciously, he turned his head to look and saw Fan Xian's trembling right hand gently wiping it on his long robe. Fan Xian's hand was completely covered in cold sweat. It was a wet mess. He knew that if he had not seen the opportunity quickly and shouted quickly, these 7 Tiger Guards would have all died at the hands of the man in the bamboo hat. However, his expression remained calm. Although his pupils constricted slightly and his right hand, hidden behind his back, trembled slowly, he remained calm. Facing such an extraordinary and divine warrior, he had to be calm. The other party was a great grandmaster. Fan Xian was not an ordinary person. Ever since he was young, he had lived with a great grandmaster who was not ranked among the great grandmasters. He had been taught by Uncle Wu Zhu hand in hand. Thus, facing the man in the bamboo hat, he was not like everyone else in the building, so shocked that they couldn't even speak. However, he was still shocked. He even began to feel a bitterness in his mouth. Wu Zhu had once talked about power. Without a sliver of Jinqi, Wu Zhu had extraordinary power, but he was, after all, Fan Xian's closest family. When Fan Xian faced a great grandmaster for the first time today, he realized that under the other party's power, he didn't even have a sliver of a chance to retaliate. Fan Xian was a meticulous person who knew himself and others. He knew that given his 9th level strength, even 10 of him could not defeat Uncle Wu Zhu. Using the same logic, 10 of him could not defeat the old man wearing the bamboo hat. What he had seen and felt earlier made Fan Xian believe even more in what Uncle Wu Zhu had once said. A 1st level can kill a 9th level as long as one's luck is good enough. But if you are facing those guys, don't talk about luck. The martial artists of the world were ranked from low to high, and those who reached the 9th level were the most powerful. The difference between each level was not insurmountable. Otherwise, Fan Xian would not have been able to slaughter everyone on Yolan Street, and he would not have been able to toy with Lang Tiao and Friar He in Shangjing, Northern Qi. Once one broke past the 9th level and entered the realm of the celestial, like Ku He, that Baldy, or the old man in front of him, it was already a completely different realm. The difference in strength was like a bottomless ravine. It was impossible for any scheme to fill it. The top floor of Baoyue brothel was completely silent, but the noise below had already begun. Although Gao Da's strike had struck the air, it had startled countless people. The noise was unbearable. After a short pause, it quieted down. The guards and Shi Sang guarding downstairs were probably taking care of it. The man in the bamboo hat by the table was still silent. It was as if he was waiting for Fan Xian to make a decision. There was no light on his body, but in everyone's eyes, his thin clothes seemed to be plated with the splendor of the sky, making it hard for people to look directly at him. In comparison, Mr. Zhou, whom Fan Xian had always wanted to capture, sat timidly by the man in the bamboo hat. No one would notice him. A simple person, yet he covered up all the splendor between heaven and earth. Fan Xian's left hand still held the fan tightly. He looked at the man in the bamboo hat by the table and didn't speak for a moment. The top floor of Baoyue brothel was completely silent. It was deathly silent. The atmosphere was oppressive. The man in the bamboo hat looked at the calm Fan Xian and smiled slightly. Your reaction, your strength, seems to be a bit stronger than the rumors say. This was referring to when Gao Da's strike had come down. Fan Xian had reacted quickly and called back the 6 people. In a flash, he had shot up and used the coffin breaker to expand his right arm. He then used a small trick to forcefully grab Gao Da's ankle and drag Gao Da back, saving his life. For Fan Xian to be able to do all this in such a short moment could already be considered perfect. It was so much so that the man in the bamboo hat revealed a glimmer of admiration. Fan Xian did not reply to this question. Contrary to everyone's expectations, he slowly walked to the side of the railing and didn't look at the man in the bamboo hat again. All of the guards, including Gao Da, were stunned. The commissioner was very daring. Facing a great grandmaster that tens of thousands of people revered, he could be so natural and not look at him. Fan Xian walked to the side of the railing and faced the bustling Suzhou. The sparse air above Suzhou and the lingering smell of firecrackers lingered in the air. He took a deep breath. His expression changed slightly and immediately returned to normal. No one knew what he was thinking about. The sound of footsteps came from the stairs. Shichanli, whose face was full of shock, and Sangwen, who had her mouth wide open and revealed worry in her gentleness, glanced at the table surrounded by the people of the Overwatch Council. They immediately turned their questioning gazes toward Fan Xian by the railing. Everyone go down. Fan Xian leaned against the railing and didn't turn his head as he gave the order in a cold voice. His hand gripped the fan tighter and tighter. The paper of the fan had warped slightly. He had probably made up his mind. Earlier, when the tiger guards had attacked, Fan Xian's shout had been able to make everyone retreat without regard for their lives. From this, it could be seen that none of the guards had any objections to his orders. They had carried them out very thoroughly. Now, when he gave the order for everyone to go down, everyone, including the tiger guards, used silence to express their opposition. A great grandmaster wanted to kill someone. At a time like this, no one dared to leave Fan Xian alone in the building. Fan Xian turned around and gazed at Gao Da with a slight smile. Perhaps my orders are no longer effective? Gao Da's heart skipped a beat. Looking at the familiar warm smile on the commissioner's face and the encouragement in it, his mind was a mess for a moment. He understood Fan Xian. Every time Fan Xian revealed that mesmerizing smile, it was often when he was truly angry. It was also when he had a card up his sleeve. Fan Xian continued, "Without my orders, no one is allowed to take one step into this building. Also, immediately evacuate the neighboring streets to prevent accidental injuries." Gao Da let out a murky breath and wiped away the blood at the side of his lips. With a muffled grunt, he led everyone down the stairs. Along the way, he also pushed down Shichanli, who was standing at the top of the stairs and unwilling to go down. When Fan Xian's personal guards came down the stairs, they saw a scene that they would remember deeply. It was a scene that made them incomparably terrified at the time. Step by step, Fan Xian slowly walked toward the table. He wore that strange smile on his face as the deformed fan in his hand opened again. As he fanned himself, he walked toward the table. His walk was very steady and free. In reality, walking from that table to this table was only a distance of 10 steps. However, these 10 steps made Fan Xian feel as if he had walked through the gates of hell. Strangely, the closer he got to the table the man in the bamboo hat was at, the calmer Fan Xian's heart became. Walking to the side of the table, Fan Xian stared into the eyes of the man in the bamboo hat. He looked directly at him rudely as if he was not at all afraid that the man could kill him with a casual raise of his hand. The man in the bamboo had also seemed to feel that the Jiangnan Road imperial envoy was rather daring and looked back at him with a slight smile. Gouda went down the stairs and immediately rearranged the defenses. At the same time, he followed the commissioner's orders and evacuated the neighboring citizens. He also ordered his subordinates to quickly go to the governor's manor to mobilize troops. Although he knew these methods had no effect on the powerful warrior in the building, he had done his best. Then he went to the top floor of a building adjacent to Baoyue brothel and flipped onto the eaves. Carefully hiding his figure, he watched every movement in Baoyue brothel across the street. He was prepared to gamble his life at any moment. Gouda crouched behind the tile beast and looked at the top floor of Baoyue brothel. He couldn't hear what the people inside were saying, but just looking at the contents was enough to shock him. The building was empty. There was only Fan Xian and the man in the bamboo hat facing each other. One was sitting by the table and the other was standing by the table. As for Mr. Zhou, although he was not a person in Fan Xian's eyes, he was still an eyesore, so he waved his hand and indicated for Mr. Zhou to scram to the side. In reality, the Juanshang conference's accountant, Mr. Zhou, was already quite frightened. He immediately left his seat obediently and squatted in the corner of the railing. There was an empty chair. Thus, Fan Xian lifted the front of his robe and sat down without a care in the world. At this moment, he was less than half a body's distance from the man in the bamboo hat. It was intimate, dangerous, and terrifying to the extreme. Gouda, who was watching from a distance, was almost scared to death. Fan Xian, who was in the building, still wore a faint smile. He put away the deformed paper fan in his left hand and slowly picked up the chopsticks the man in the bamboo hat had slammed on the table. He inserted them back into the bamboo tube. He did these 3 actions very carefully, slowly, and carefully. After the chopsticks were inserted, he sighed happily and clapped his hands as if he had completed a great task. The man in the bamboo hat did not kill him. This meant that everything could be discussed. Courageous! The man in the bamboo hat looked at Fan Xian with a slight smile. Among the younger generation, you are the most outstanding. If the great grandmaster's words got out, it would certainly establish Fan Xian's unbreakable position. However, Fan Xian did not feel slightly gratified because of these words. He smiled warmly and said, "So what? If you want to kill me, isn't it a matter of time?" The man in the bamboo hat calmly said, "What I said earlier still stands. You pull back the Black Knights and I won't kill you." Fan Xian suddenly raised his head. A glimmer of mockery and disdain appeared in his eyes. In this world, it had been many years since someone dared to use this kind of gaze to look at the man in the bamboo hat. Even though the man in the bamboo hat was a top figure in the world, he still couldn't help but feel a glimmer of anger. "This is your request? A proper great grandmaster has fallen to such a level? You don't need this old face, but the Qin court still needs face." Fan Xian suddenly opened his mouth. Once he opened his mouth, countless sharp words spouted out. It was as if the person in front of him was not an unfathomable great grandmaster but a subordinate he had pulled by the ear and lectured in the Overwatch Council. The man in the bamboo hat froze. It was clear that no one had lectured him like this before. For a moment he couldn't react. Fan Xian suddenly slammed the table and stared at the man in the bamboo hat's strange face. Enunciating each word, he said, "Have you gone senile? This is a matter of the Juanshang conference. What does it have to do with you that I move the Black Knights to kill people? Do you have any filial sons or grandsons in the manor? You just charged up like this and put a knife to my neck, and I have to listen to you? Even if I did listen to you, what would happen in the future? Would your filial sons and grandsons not die? I'm afraid they will die even faster." Fan Xian's voice became sharp and mixed with boundless disdain and mockery. Pointing at the man in the bamboo hat's nose, he scolded, "Please, wake up. What year and year is it now? It has long since ceased to be the age where you can walk unhindered with a sword. Who do you think you are? Do you think you are a sword immortal? Isn't it a goddamn road to death?" The man in the bamboo hat looked at Fan Xian like he was looking at an idiot. Suddenly, he felt that he was also an idiot. He traveled the world and received the respect of tens of thousands of people. Even the ruler of a country looked at him with respect. He couldn't even find someone who was disrespectful to him, much less someone like this beautiful young man in front of him who pointed at his nose and scolded him. However, he was, after all, a great grandmaster. After a moment of shock, he recovered his calm. On the contrary, he looked at Fan Xian and chuckled. His laughter was very joyous. How many years has it been since someone has dared to speak to me like this? As he spoke, the man in the bamboo hat's tone became heavy and he coldly said, I will count to 3. If you don't give the order to retreat, I can only kill you. That pair of steady hands slowly rested on the table. Fan Xian's gaze lowered slightly. He looked at the pair of hands that should have been old but didn't have a single wrinkle. The sword under the table was pulled by a powerful aura and gave off the cry of a dragon. Amidst the buzzing sound, the hilt of the sword slowly rose. The half of the snow-white sword body illuminated the entire building. 3. The man in the bamboo hat began to count down coldly. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and glanced at him. Straightforwardly he said, 1. After saying this, he smashed his fist down beside him. This punch was mixed with his nearly 20 years of day and night meditation and the tyrannical zhenqi of the nameless martial secret. It was mixed with the Yi family's coffin breaker technique and the supreme heart of Tianyi Dao he had learned from Haiting. The qi flowed at will. In an instant, the will broke through tens of thousands of barriers. The killing came out of the meridians and moved to the body of the fist. It smashed down viciously. The fist smashed onto the hilt of the sword. The air in the building rippled without reason. The air outside the railing seemed to tremble, making the scenery outside change shape slightly. With a clang, the normal sword was smashed back by Fan Xian's fist. The dragon's cry immediately disappeared. By the railing, Mr. Zhou had long fainted from this shocking shock and fell wretchedly to the side of the railing. Fan Xian swallowed back the mouthful of fresh blood that had rushed up from his chest and stared fiercely and stubbornly into the eyes of the man in the bamboo hat. Suddenly, he opened his mouth and shouted, Deng Ziyu, listen to my order. This shout carried zhenqi and spread out. In an instant, it spread through the entire Chang Street. Gouda, who was hiding across the street, was startled and unconsciously stood up. Deng Ziyu, who had been standing guard in the middle of the street, didn't know what had happened. He replied in a trembling voice, I am here. Fan Xian continued to stare into the man's eyes and said viciously, Send out the signal. The Black Knights are to enter the garden. If they resist, kill without mercy. Kill without mercy. After an indeterminable amount of time, the man in the bamboo hat's complicated sigh rang out in the quiet top floor of Baoyue brothel. You're right. I should not have entered the world again. However, the people you want to kill and the people you want to capture are people I care about. What about that? The man in the bamboo hat gently gripped the hilt of the sword by the table and flipped his hand to lift it. In a quiet voice, he said, I will take the sword and leave Dong Mountain. The power of the sword gradually increased. It would be a lie to say that Fan Xian was not afraid. It would be even more false to say that he was not nervous. However, he used his valiant state of mind to control every muscle on his face. He stared fixedly at the man in the bamboo hat's face and said one thing. You don't dare to kill me. A moment of silence. Why wouldn't I dare to kill you? Because you are not that idiot Sigu Jian. Fan Xian gripped the broken fan on the table tightly again and said, Of the 4 great grandmasters, as long as it is not that heartless idiot Sigu Jian, no one dares to kill me. The man in the bamboo hat's hand continued to hold the hilt of the sword steadily. Fan Xian believed that as long as the man pulled out this sword, his head would certainly be separated from his body. Thus, he forcefully suppressed the glimmer of fear in the depths of his heart and said, word by word, That is why I do not understand why you would appear here. In my heart, you should be that noble man who rides half a broken boat and lightly sings to the world, free and at ease, his sleeves not stained by the drifting clouds. Not a martial man whose heart has been disturbed by matters and made such a stupid move. There was a strange light in the man's eyes. Fan Xian didn't know if his eyes were playing tricks on him, but he saw a glimmer of admiration in the man's eyes. The waves only bloom for a moment, but compared to a millennial stone, it is not much different. Sir is the same. Fan Xian stared fiercely at the man and said, "If you were Yi Lun, how would you dare to kill me?" To be continued. If you want to know what happened afterwards, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.